ইউটিউবটা লাইভ করে দাও এবার প্লিজ। Okay, it's 2 now. Good afternoon, all. I am Jyotirmoy Shil from the Department of English, Malda College. On behalf of the organizers, I welcome you to this centenary webinar on Ray and his films, organized by Malda College Film Society, affiliated to FFSI and Department of English, Malda College. This centenary webinar on Ray and his films has been conducted to commemorate the centenary birth anniversary of the legendary Bengali film director, writer, and illustrator Satyajit Ray. As you know already, today three eminent film scholars would shed light on Satyajit Ray's uh, artistic legacy. Now, I would request Dr. Manoj Kumar Boydra, Principal of Malda College and President of Malda College Film Society, to deliver the welcome note. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Jyotirmoy. A very good afternoon to all of you. I feel honored to welcome all the resource persons, my fellow colleagues, other audience members, and my dear students for taking a keen part in this centenary webinar on Ray and his films, organized by the Malda College Film Society in collaboration with the Department of English, Malda College. I convey my sincere thanks to our esteemed speakers for today's webinar, the eminent film scholar Mr. Amrit Gangar, Professor Rita Dotto, film scholar and assistant professor of political science, Maharaja Monindu Chandra College, and Mr. Indranil Rai Chaudhuri, the director of several critically acclaimed films, including Fori. And I also would like to thank Mr. Premendra Mojumdar, the Honorable Vice President of the Federation of Film Societies of India, and Dr. Anuradha Kunda, the Secretary of Malda College Film Society, and she is the Associate Professor in the Department of English of Malda College, under whose keen observation the college film society is flourishing. I am sure you would release the way our esteemed speakers would explore the multiple shades of Satyajit Ray's genius. Have a great time ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. I would take this opportunity to thank our respected principal, sir, for encouraging us to organize this webinar and providing necessary support. Now, I would request Dr. Anuradha Kunda, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Malda College, Secretary of Malda College Film Society, and also she's the convener of this webinar. I would request Madam to deliver the keynote address. Madam, please. Madam, you're not audible. Sorry, ma'am, but you're not audible. Still not audible.
Can you listen to
Yes.
me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Now we can listen to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy, honored, and I must say I'm privileged also to be the keynote speaker in this webinar on the birth centenary of Shottudit Rai, organized by the Department of English, Malda College, and the Film Society of Malda College, which is affiliated to FFSI, Federation of Film Society of India. In the year 2019, Malda College had its film society, and that goes to the credit of Mr. Premendra Mojumdar, the Vice President of FFSI Eastern Zone. Thank you, Premendra, for all the assistance. Our inaugural program had screened Charulata, Shottudit Rai's Charulata, because our intention was to getting the students acquainted with Shottudit Rai. Now, ever since human beings had learned to communicate, they became fond of storytelling. Every human being loves to listen to stories, and a good storyteller is much coveted. A filmmaker is basically a visual storyteller, I think, because as a storyteller, he evokes all the unsaid things. And as a visual storyteller, Shottudit Rai, we are proud to say that he's one of the greatest in the whole world. There are different ways and techniques of storytelling. Different filmmakers use different kinds of storytelling. Shottudit Rai, he himself said that his technique of storytelling, visual storytelling, was completely opposite to that of the Hollywood movies. I think he had a linear kind of storytelling, but the films were multi-layered, which from the individual turned to social, from social they turned to political, as personal is political. And from that social aspect, they turned to something universal. But they were never propagandist. He was never a propagandist. Essentially a humanist. And the humanitarian approach of his movies are always felt in our heart. Soul-searching movies. Now, we have seen that after the entry of formalism in films, there have been greater emphasis on the forms, on the techniques of the filmmaking. So sometimes forms became more important than the content of the film, and they were rather abstract. I'm not going to mention all the techniques in which forms became more important than the content. But rather than formalism, where I think subject matter disappears times, in the films of Shottudit Rai, the content is more important than the form. So there is a kind of structural coherence in the films of Shottudit Rai, which makes the story attractive to all kinds of people, all groups of people, because in his films, you can see that there is a vast range of culture from the, and it includes all the rural people and the city people, the small town people, all are involved. In the words, I would like to quote a few lines where he says, ever since Mahanagar, which I shot in 1962-63, I've been operating the camera, all the shots, everything. It's wonderful to direct through the air reflex because that's the only position to tell you where the actors are in exact relation to each other. And I find it easier because I'm behind the lens and the actors are not conscious of watching them. And he says, I have the whole thing in my heart at all times. So it is not that he was editing. Everything happened in the edit board. It was all cut in the camera. And that's why the stories were so interesting, so attractive, and so universal. There were particular minute details. You can never forget That's a beautiful scene in Pather Panchali, that Oppu and Durga, they were running to watch the train, the Kash bone. Uh, that is the ordinariness of the ordinary man. That is the most difficult thing to depict in a film, the ordinariness of the ordinary man, which Satyajit Ray would bring out in all his movies. And there is a certain contemplative mood, which is very contemplative, soul-searching. There is a rhythm, kind of rhythm, which ultimately in the end of the film elevates our soul. And something very contemporary. He never did films which had passing themes, like Gopigain Bhagabain. It's the magic of music. It's the magic of peace he talks about. Hirak Rajadeshi, which is a great political satire. And of all the greatest detective films, I would say the Feluda films are there, though they are not to be discussed today. And I would like to mention Ganashotru, in which I think this is most relevant film even now, especially now, because the kind of a superstitious society was depicting there in Ganashotru, that people are getting drowned in superstition. They were not following science. I think the entire political and religious significance of the film is very, very relevant to nowadays. Even in a green movie like Jono Arunno, people getting drowning in corruption. In the end, we find that when Shomnath realizes that he is getting drowned into corruption, there is a kind of spirituality. Because if you believe that spirituality is a kind of innate goodness, that is the most dominating thing, predominant thing in the films of Satyajit Ray. And it has to be talked about so that more and more people become conscious. More and more people become more conscious about themselves. So to realize one's own self, to rethink, to re-evaluate the films of Satyajit Ray is so very important. And I'd like to mention, that's not taking much time, I'd like to mention one just film, that is Kanchanjunga, which I think is one of the most modern films. Though Charulata was his personal favorite, I think I must talk a few lines about Kanchanjunga, because it is the film in which Satyajit Ray doesn't deal with rural Bengal, he doesn't deal with the city as he did in so many other films, but he deals with a very dear old Darjeeling. But it is not just the ranges that matter. There is a kind of conflict in the movie, which ultimately ends up in liberation. Like the very materialistic Rai Bahadur, played beautifully by Toby Vishwas. When he sees a Pahari Shanal watches a bird, the Rai Bahadur asks, can it be roasted? So that is the materialistic man. And just opposite to him is his wife, played by Koruna Bandopadhyay, who sings E Porobashe Ke Robe Hai. And the kind of liberation that Monisha gets at the end of the film, that she's liberated to marry the person she falls in love with, not shackled with family prestige anymore. So Kanchanjunga, it's a metaphor of revelation. So this is how we get a complete story. Nothing is abstract. So many humanitarian aspects can be seen. I'm very happy that the principal of our college has gladly agreed and arranged this webinar where the three very eminent speakers will speak today. So I will not take much time. So when you start speaking about Satyajit Ray's movies, you're very close to your heart, and that's unending. I just welcome all the speakers. Our first speaker is the eminent film critic, Mr. Amrit Gangar. He is a film theorist, is a curator and historian, former consultant curator of the National Museum of Indian Cinema, Mumbai, and adjunct faculty, IDC, IIT, Mumbai. And he will talk about Sadgati, the film which Satyajit Ray made for television. Those who, the students who haven't, I think they have already watched it because we have asked them to do it. That's all. According to Mr. Gangar, it's Ravana in a Brahmin village, and so there's a Goppo in it, which is story. So ultimately, we are all waiting for him. Welcome, Mr. Gangar, to the webinar, and I would request you to proceed.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, madam, but I think the title is actually Agrarathil Daitya, Devil in a Brahmin Village, Satyajit Ray's telefilm Sadgati and a Gappo. Sir,
Yes,
over to you, sir.
30th June, it is today. I don't know what made you to choose this date, that is 30th June, but this date is significant to me, historically and contextually, with this film that I'm going to reflect upon. 30th June, had the anthropologist Manmohan Mitra, the Agantuk, I'm sure you got the clue, been here today, or he would have told us, or he would have looked straight into the eyes of that city-bred, clever pleader, Pritish Sengupta, and told him that how Santhal tribals of the Bengal presidency rose against the mighty British Gora Sahibs and protested against that power on 30th June 1855. That was the date, 166 years ago. Right in your ilaka, in your area or zone, there was Santhal uprising on this very day, 30th June. And therefore, this 30th June is important to me within the context of our film Satgati in various manners that I will try and connect with. Foolishly, even the pleader, Sengupta, asked the Agantuk anthropologist whether he knew Muria tribes. And then the Agantuk replies to him about what is Muria, that his knowledge was so abundant and personal and so intimate that the pleader had to leave. I'm talking about Agantuk, Satyajit Ray's film, and the anthropologist. 30th June 1855 was a momentous day in the history of resistance in this country. Resistance by the poor oppressed against the rich but barbaric oppressor. Eventually, the bow was crushed by the bayonet, but we are retracing that historical moment today in Malda on this day, that is 30th June 2021. The date is real, the place is real and not virtual. Thanks to Munshi Premchand's short story, Sadgati, and Satyajit Ray's telefilm of the same name. Moments merge without any pre-warning, but they do and illumine a new glow. We are actually enlightened by the new glow today by these very moments of history. They are merging now at this moment. And that glow of light, we are looking at ourselves actually, the mirror of history, and how mankind has been brutal and at certain sections of people, how disparity and inequity has been promoted by the mankind. This mirror gives us the idea. The Bengal presidency was the largest that had in its fold parts of Odisha and Bihar, and present Jharkhand, of course, where this Santhal Pargana is there. There were also large-scale migrations of the Santhals. And the oppressed masses, whom we call now scheduled tribes and scheduled castes, moved towards Malda and Dinajpur. Dinajpur was one at that time, not east and west. And migratory processes were very long and complex. You know, Bombay presidency, which was smaller than Bengal presidency, even Madras presidency, which was smaller, Bombay presidency had Aden in its fold because of the East India Company went on annexing certain parts of the world and then attached to those presidencies. So Aden in Yemen was part of Bombay presidency. So Bombay Bengal presidency had this historical moment, which we connect with Dukhi of Sadgati somehow. The upper castes and classes had their own vicious fascistic or casteist designs to enslave and trample the lower rungs. They had designed the Mahajani system of lending money at very high rates of interest. You will be surprised to know that man and his son will work for their entire life to repay a paltry sum of rupees 25 they might have borrowed from the zamindar. Whole life they work, and this continues even today. 1981, Satyajit Ray is on record saying that this system even continues now. And in 2021, it continues. I have my personal experience. Last March, when first wave of coronavirus started, there were thousands of migrant workers flung on the road, and they walked hundreds of miles toward their homes. I had produced an ebook at that time, emerging from Facebook, my Facebook debate, which went on for month and a half, long time. And many people debated about this whole phenomenon. There was young banker from Jharkhand, and he said that there are villages in Jharkhand, whole villages and whole families. They work for entire life for the zamindar without being paid anything, because they were repaying these even fictitious amount of debt. This is the situation in this country, independent Republic of India. We feel ashamed sometimes. But looking at Sadgati, we think that this is an ongoing story. Such barbarism still existed in independent India, as I said. Last year, when this ebook I produced, which I can share with you, maybe I can send it to Professor Seal, and he can distribute this ebook to you. It's quite interesting because I'm connecting migrant workers' problems with cinema somewhere. And this young banker told me this story about Jharkhand villages and families, entire families working for zamindars. And Dukhi was not paid a penny by the Brahmin priest, Gasi Ram. Just before his death, Premchand or Dhanpat Rai was his name. He died on 8th October 1936. Just before his death, he wrote a long essay called Mahajani Sabhyata, in which he discusses the theory of bondage and labor that Hinduism sanctions, and that is described so strikingly in his story Sadgati. It's about Hinduism, how Hinduism sanctions. And I will be discussing the Bhagavad Gita later on, which is also part of the film Sadgati, and how certain sanctions are given for this brutal exploitation of one man of the another man. Premchand wrote in this essay called Mahajani Sabhyata, human society has been split up into two groups. The larger proportion consists of those who toil and sweat, a very small proportion of those who, by virtue of their power and influence, exercise control over the large mass. The first group has no sympathy, nor the least consideration of any kind for this large mass. The sole purpose of his existence is to sweat for his masters, to shed blood in their service, and one day to say goodbye to the world in silence. This is what Dukhi does. Dukhi goes away, working for that monstrous Brahmin. Under the skin, Sadgati, the story and the film, raise main critical and complex questions along with ironies, vidambana, as we call it. Poor Dukhi of Sadgati is terribly burdened by the history of submission, self-hate, guilt, and self-sacrifice under brutal Brahminical caste hierarchy and hegemony. Like those Santhas who rose in protest, the poor untouchables in Brahmin village get inspired by a Gond. Gond is a little higher caste in the caste hierarchy. The Gond man, if you remember, inspires the Dalits or in their basti, slightly higher. And so the murderous Brahmin priest is forced to dispose of the dead body of the chamar, of the lowest of the low caste himself, because all the Dalits or Harijans or the untouchables or chamars refuse to dispose of the body. They get united. As Santhal had got united. 60,000 of them, can you imagine? 60,000 of these poor Santhals had united right in Bengal Presidency on 30th June, 1855. I'm grateful to the Malda College, its Department of English, Principal Sir, Dr. Vaidya, Dr. Kunda, and Professor Jyotirmoy Sil for inviting me to participate in this webinar to observe Satyajit Ray's birth centenary. Professor Sil, whom I addressed as Jyotirmoy, and I immediately struck a chord like Saridaya. This is a beautiful word, Sanskrit word called Saridaya, indirect heart. on the first day of our email conversation. Within 5 minutes, if you remember, Jyotirmay, we were talking about Alberto Giacometti. Alberto Giacometti was a great scholar, a sculptor, and that led to Ramkinkar Bej, that led to Sujata, that led to Buddha. And Buddha brought memories back of Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who created a Buddhist Republican Party with blue flag to emancipate millions of the Dukhiyas and Zuriyas and Danyas of this country. We are not getting into the complex web of politics that kept opening up later, but Baba Sahib Ambedkar imbued new life, a new voice into the Dalits living under caste shackles for centuries. The story Sadgati, Premchand wrote in the year 1924. In the same year, when he was giving birth to Dukhi, the Chamar of that village, in Bombay, he was doing this in somewhere in North India. In Bombay, B.R. Ambedkar was creating an institution called Bahiskrut Hitkarini Sabha. Bahiskrut is the people who are castigated by the dominant society, Hindu society. They were all untouchables. And Ambedkar was creating this institution, Bahiskrut Hitkarini Sabha, to approach the government, at that time the British government, to make situations or circumstances by which the Dalits get their own dignity of living, their own freedom. And this Sabha was created in the same year when Sadgati, the story, was being written there by Premchand. This is quite an interesting merger of moments. The motto of this institution was educate, organize, and agitate. The agitation, the poor Dukhiya or Dukhi never knew he could not do that. And that is irony of history. And this irony of history still continues. Before I begin my presentation, let us propitiate the 21st century God whom I call Googleshwara. Googleshwara is omnipresent, omniscient, and benevolent God of our times. And it's propitiation to let this PPT run smoothly. This Google sometimes have problem, but my student Jai Kholia and Jyotirmay had already had the trial runs, and we are quite confident that will not be any hitches as far as moving image and the sound is concerned. Let me introduce at this moment Jai Kholia, who is a student of mine from Surat, a brilliant filmmaker, who is helping me on this PPT, of course, along with Jyotirmay. So we begin. I'm also grateful to my wife Kuntal and my son Biplav for their help. We begin now with my presentation of PPT. Jai, please. And stay there until I tell you. Can we, okay, yeah. This huge papier-mâché effigy of the 10-headed Ravana, you must be remembering them, right in the Brahmin courtyard, is not there in the story. But it is extremely crucial to the film in the way it is situated. Maybe it was the time of Navaratri festival, and the effigy was waiting to be burnt on the day of Dasera or Vijayadashmi. Sadgati film takes place in 1 day's time. Night we don't see, but early dawn the next day, the Brahmin Pandit drags Dukhiya's dead body to the village dump yard. Or else, why should this Ramana effigy be there? And it is quite large. It is placed on the platform. Maybe Navratri festivities were yet to begin. We don't know. The film was shot in Raipur in Madhya Pradesh, and probably the month was August or September. At that time, there were rains, also it was monsoon time. What is interesting is the sets and the spaces. Just focus on this image and focus on the spaces around this Ramana image. There is a small lane from where you will see Dukhiya coming in, entering from that street. This spacing is interesting. Cinema is, you must remember, is time and space. So we always talk about content, but time and space is the part of form. And without form, this whole debate about content and form is, I think, redundant. You cannot do without form and just with content or each other. So this is quite intriguing. The presence of Ravana in the courtyard or enclave of the Brahmins. Why? Why this image put? But it also signifies many other things that we will be discussing. You might get amused by this presence of Ravana, and we will discuss later soon. What is, again, I'm telling you that interesting is pacing of this. The art director of this film was Ashok Bose, who had assisted the master Bansi Chandra Gupta, who had created this set. Whole village set was created in Raipur, and it was created to keep in mind the camera movement and the human movement in mind, and that's why this image becomes interesting, as we see in the moving image soon. There are the spaces of Dukhya would be traversing before his life is taken away by the blood-sucking monster, the Brahmin Pandit. There are two Saitans in one enclave. One Saitan is the living Brahmin Pandit, and another Saitan is Ravana, as we know. But there are, though evil and the antagonistic in the epic Mahabharata, Ravana was himself a Brahmin, as we know, devout follower Shiva, a great scholar, a capable ruler, and a maestro of the Veena. He was not an ordinary person, Ravana. And here again, the virtue and the vice both mingle. This is important because of the profane and the sacred both come together in this frame and in this scene. Satyajit Ray wrote the script of Deliverance in English. It was then translated into Hindi by Premchand's son Amrit Rai. As Ray said, he could judge whether a line of dialogue which had been translated from the original English is the best possible dialogue in the circumstances. That is where the actors come in. They suggest alternatives, which the translator accepts or rejects. This would never happen with my Bengali film, he said. Nobody questioned the brightness of the dialogue. But he always wrote his dialogue in his Bengali film. But Hindi he was not comfortable with. He had already made Satranj Ki Khiladi before. And so the Sadgati was the second film for television, but again in Hindi. Next. This is the title I gave to my lecture. Agar Harshil Daityaha. Devil in a Brahmis village. Agar Harshil. I don't know whether you know John Abraham, the filmmaker, not the actor, from Kerala. He made a film called Amaryan, which is very well known. John Abraham made a Tamil film called Agar Harshil Kadudai, Donkey in a Brahmin's Village in 1977. Agarhara is translated as a village. It could also be an enclave. Some have translated it as Brahmin's ghetto, which I think is erroneous. Agar Harshil Kadudai was banned in Tamil Nadu as it was seen as Brahminical bigotry, which might hurt the sentiments of Brahmins. Even Doordarshan was forced to cancel a scheduled telecast of the film. Abraham was inspired by Robert Bresson's Awazard Balthazar. The Satan has found his sanctity to occupy space in the Brahmin's enclave, as Ravana, in Sadgati. What is interesting for me to use this title for my lecture today is the way two beasts of burden. Dukhi is reduced to be a beast of burden. They are coming together. Donkey, the beast of burden, at least could be attributed with certain healing, miraculous power, but not Dukhi. The beast of burden is Dukhi as beast of burden, is destined to be killed on the altar of casteism, and his dead body thrown away like a carcass. Agrahara means the murderous remains. Agrahara remains. Dukhi is gone. The murderous Brahmin Pandit gets back his chastity and sacredness by a few drops of the holy Ganga Jal. Surya and little Dhanya have lost their lifeline. Nobody cares. We don't even know what will happen to them. But we know that this Brahmin, nobody will touch him. Nobody will disturb him. He will go on exploiting, and he will be living his fat life. Next. Yes, Satyajit Ray's telefilm Sadgati and a Gappo. This also, Gappo has a significance, if you remember, the Ghatak film. But to me, the crucial or key word is telefilm. The key word here is telefilm, in other words, television. It was the time of state television, the Doordarshan. It was, I think, in the 1980s, the ultrasonic remote control became popular. Until then, we had to get up and go to the television set to switch it on or off. The younger generation may not remember this time, but I remember the day when there was no remote control, the weapon. You had to really get up, walk to the television set and switch it off or on. And that time, one image that I remember distinctly was when just before you switched it off, there was an image which had small particles like desert. And those particles went on sparkling for a few moments. That image is gone after so many channels came in and then remote control came in. That was a very precious image for me. You have missed that image. Satyajit Ray was not very fond of television, but he was invited to make a film based on a short story. In fact, series of short stories, so short films, television films by the government of India, but he was not very inclined to. He then thought of the large audiences that television immediately gets. So he chose a story in Hindi because it was to be nationally telecast. And he got the story Sadgati from UNESCO's translation project. It was the big collection of short stories translated into English, Hindi short stories. And he liked it very much. He found it very cinematic and very, very dramatic in a way. But he sought television film as a regular film on 35 mm celluloid, except adding a few close-ups. You know, television can't do without close-up. Television will not tolerate long shots. Television has that limitations, and Satyajit Ray knew it. His sounds were still subtle. If you just look at listen to the sound, they're subtle and not loud as television would want it. When Sadgati was telecast, there were no private channels, not cable television. Color television was introduced around 1982. However, in an interview, Satyajit Ray had said that when Sadgati was telecast, he had seen it in black and white television. When television came in, many felt it was the end of cinema, in all senses of the term, production, exhibition, and viewing. It was a medium of information and broadcasting. But cinema had to be succumbed to it. And then cinema became part of mass communication. You know, it is part of information broadcasting. It's part of the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, cinema, which is not proper, according to me. It's the only state of Kerala which has the Ministry of Cinema, which has the Chalachitra Academy, which treats cinema as cinema and not as part of information and broadcasting. This, I think, is a matter to be thought about. But when television came in, this information broadcasting took stronger roots, and cinema became mass communication. It became the part of syllabus of mass communication, which I think was killing cinema. It was a medium that eventually had to succumb to the pressures. The end of cinema had already happened around that time. The cathode tube tyranny, I call it tyranny of the tube. The end of cinema had already happened. The cathode tube tyranny eventually paved way to the other forms of tubular tyranny, as I call them, though becoming astonishingly accessible and democratized, as we all believe. But at what cost? What was at stake was the sanctity of the image. It became precariously vulnerable to manipulation and distortion. Even now, when you are looking at me or when I'm looking at you, it's the distorted image that I'm getting. It's not the normal image. And most of the time when we are looking at YouTube, it is distorted image. This is not in proper aspect ratio. But eye is the most cunning organ of our body. Eye gets adjusted to everything, and our pragmatism, particularly the middle class pragmatism, is getting used to everything. And so YouTube is throwing up everything at us in any form of the image, but still it is welcome because we don't have many other options now. The OTT platform, we don't have many other options. The filmmaker doesn't have celluloid. If I want to make a film on Tellywood, I cannot because this neoliberal market economy has shut the doors. You have to think about this. This is quite fascistic in a democracy, though we feel that it's democratic, very democratic, but it's not. Cinematography has always been living in inherent contradictions. I'm using the word cinematography as Robert Bresson has used. I'm not using the word movie or film. This was the reason I say telefilm is a key word. In this title, Satyajit Ray's telefilm is a key word for me. Tubular tyranny is also a fact of life. Sadgati, the telefilm, was sought by the cinematographer Somendu Roy. In fact, I can give you this additional information that Ray was keen to see this film on a big screen as a normal film. And a special screening was organized in Calcutta at Bijoli Cinema on 28th of March, 1982, along with Sadgati. His another television film, which he made for French television, Piku, was also screened. And then there was another screening of Sadgati as normal film at London on 22nd July, 1982. So it was not just television, but he also watched the film as normal film. Next. The word. Now we strike at the right, at the word, at the root. Why this word, Sadgati? Next. I think the English word deliverance doesn't adequately convey the meaning of the Sanskrit or Hindi word Sadgati. Though deliverance has synonyms such as liberation, salvation, emancipation, redemption, somehow I feel Sadgati has still a deeper and slightly different connotation in the sense of moksha. Gati conveys movement, and here it could be a transcendental movement. Urdhvagati, not adhogati. Urdhvagati is towards moksha, towards heaven. So we have this imagination of heaven and hell. Hell is downward, adhogati. So this urdhvagati, the gati is a movement. The deliverance word in English doesn't have this sense of movement of gati. Sadgati has. Sadgati has to be urdhvagati, leading to the state of liberation, that is moksha, freedom from sansara. The Monier-Williams Sanskrit-English dictionary gives the meaning of the word Sadgati as good or happy state or fortune, the way of good men, felicity or beatitude. The Sadgati word is extremely important and crucial for the film. Sadgati of booze. Booze Sadgati. Dukhis, because he's get mukti in his mrityu? I doubt. We have to think about it. Even the names of principal characters symbolize the oppressed condition of these villages. Dukhi. Dukhi means who is in condition of perennial pain. And then Zuri. Zuri, people call her Zuria. Zuri means wrinkles on the skin. She is a woman born with wrinkles and cannot escape that imprint. Dhani, their daughter, would mean Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth or money. But the moment you call her Dhanya, she is reduced to vegetable. Everybody calls her Dhanya. The Brahmin priest is named Ghasiram. This is also interesting. The Brahmin priest is called Ghasiram. After Ghas, Ghas is grass. He is Lord of grass. He is Lord Ram of grass, Ghasiram. In fact, the film Sadgati begins with Ghas or grass. Our ironing man in Mumbai, we have the Istriwala, whose name is Dukhi Ram. In other words, these names, Dukhi Ram and Gashi Ram, makes Lord Ram a subaltern god. A god who doesn't want big temples. He doesn't want temples of whose Sikhara touch the sky. He doesn't want so much public money being wasted. It's a subaltern god. Because of this name, I can imagine Dukhi Ram or Ghazi Ram. But Dukhi is called Dukhya. Next. Ravana metonymy. This metonymy is important. You know the meaning of metonymy. Where does metonymy operate here? Ravana effigy has a metonymical relationship with the blood-sucking monster Ghazi Ram. It is a metonymy between real and the representational. Who is real? The Ghazi Ram, the blood-sucking monster, is real Ravana actually, and the Ravana effigy is representational. So there are two Ravanas meet in a metonymical relationship, and both occupy almost the same space. The Brahmin enclave, that is the space they occupy. The so-called adharma remains outside. Ravana we call adharma because he's devil, he's evil. Adharma remains outside in the courtyard, but dharma remains inside his house, doing puja and sleep and drink bhang and all that, and propitiate gods. It is an interesting metonymy that Sadgati, the film, creates in his. It is not part of the original story by Munshi Premchand. The short film of 45 minutes, this is interesting structurally, has as many as 5 Ravana movements I see in the film, which occupy over 7 minutes of duration. This 7 minutes is almost 16% of the total duration of the film, which is quite long. But at every 9 minutes, you get this punctuation of Ravana. So this is interesting, the way Satyajit Ray has punctuated this film with the image of Ravana, which I will show you how it gets shrunk at every step. This is very interesting way. I'm surprised that not many critics have written about this, at least as far as I know in English. I see only in one book there is some discussion about Darius Cooper's book, Between Modern Tradition and Modernity. But in other books or articles, I have not found any good reference or analysis of this scene of Ravana. In Bengali language, I don't know if anybody has written about it. You must tell me if somebody has. I will be interested in knowing. I will also be talking about other additional scenes that Satyajit Ray introduced in the film, which is not there in the story. But let us see the Ravana movements now. Next, as I see them, 5 movements. 5 movements we will see one by one. Next, movement 1. Please hold, please hold. Start and pause, Jai. Start and pause. This is movement 1 of Ravana, how the movement begins. Ravana doesn't move. He is there steady and static, but there is movement around him. Pause there with the image. Ghazi Ram, the movement begins with the Ghazi Ram, the Pandit, performing puja. He's quite narcissistic as he looks at him in the mirror, very narcissistically. It is the sound of the puja bell that fills the spaces. There is no other space. Says, please run. Please play. Listen to the sound. Sound is extremely important. We normally avoid sound. This is the street that Ashok Bose had created in sets in a village here in Raipur. And this is how Dukhi enters with gas to Ghazi Ram, Lord of Grass. There is no sound. Very sound, Jai. You have to replay it. Go back with sound. The sound is important because sound is only the puja bell, the small bell. And that
there wasn't any sound?
Enveloped the whole. No, I didn't hear. Or increase the volume. Sound is very important. We forget because we always focus on content. We cannot divide form and content.
Okay, please tell me if you can hear now.
Sure. Yes. This is the. This sound envelops the whole scene of the space. This Brahmin who doesn't work, who gets everything from the poor. And the way it is tracking shot, the way Dukhi enters the face of Ravana. This is interesting theme with Ravan that Satyajit has introduced or included in the film. This sound is enveloping the whole space. Yes, what is interesting here is the way Brahmin enclave or Agrahara or the courtyard is specialized, the way the space is distributed. The papier mesh Ramana effigy also occupies sizable vertical space along with the house tops, which are shorter. The entry of Dukhya with a load of grass on his head makes him the beast of burden, taking grass to the Lord of Gas, Gashiram. His humble hut is 1 mile away. This information is given by the story. It's not close. His hut is outside the village because they are chamars, they are low caste, untouchable. They cannot live very close to Brahmin's village. This 1 mile he has already walked with this load of grass to this village, to this Brahmin's house. And we have to understand this distance which he has already walked. So next, we'll see the next moment second. You concentrate on the image of Ravana and what happens to that image, along with sound, of course. Now he is actually leading. There is no grass on his head, leading towards his death. It's very ominous. And how Ravana enters now from pan from left to right. Earlier the pan was right to left. The image was little more shrunk. It's not complete. We go to the next moment 3 of Ravana. Yes. Now he's again turned to beast of burden, a lot of weight on his back. See how Ravana comes. It's further shrunk, image of Ravana. It's shorter too. The duration getting shorter the image gets shrunk more and more. The beast of burden, this poor human being is reduced to by the blood-sucking monster Ghasiram when Ravana stands as a witness in the same space but still empty and different. One Ravan is witnessing the other evil, the other monster. It's quite interesting metonymy. The next moment 4, Ravan. These 5 moments are extremely important in the film, the way I look at it.
चाहे मेरी जान ही क्यों ना निकल जाए, ठीक कराऊंगा। राम चौधरी, छोड़ूंगा नहीं, छोड़ूंगा नहीं। बाहर ले जाओ। क्षमा करना महाराज, ये गोली हाथ से फिसल गई, आगे फिर नहीं होगा महाराज। क्या हुआ भगवान दास? क्यों मुझे कुल्हाड़ी फेंक कर मारी? किसने? वो जवान। शिव शिव शिव, पर क्यों? पगला गया होगा। इधर मत आना, उधर जाओ, इधर मत आना।
Notice the Ravana presence. As if Dukhi was uttering these abuses for the exploiter, not for exploiter Pandit, because not for the blunt X that he was given. Inside, he was sensing his end, feeling helpless and surrendered. The contrast created within the leisure class and the toiling person is so stark. As we know, Dukhi hasn't had his morning breakfast. He also had fever in his body. His wife Zuriya was requesting not to go, but he did because he was worried about his daughter, and Pandit might not like because he was late. He goes there and to meet with death. He was concerned about Brahmin's food. He was more concerned about Brahmin's food rather than his own. He could offer to him when he had not eaten anything. That was his concern. Ghasiram, the blood-sucking monster, is having his post-lunch siesta. He had no concern for this man, nor his wife, the Brahmin's wife, and they had no concern for this man, whether he was hungry or whether he had fever. And this kind of negligence by one human being toward the another is very starkly shown in this juxtaposition. This is the last moment of Ravana, moment 5. And now you see how Ravana is shrunk, the image. From the beginning, you saw the whole image. Now, this is the only image now you see. It is shrunk so much.
बड़ा गंभीर मामला है पंडित जी। जब तक मुर्दा वहां से नहीं हटे, हम लोग उस रास्ते पानी लेने नहीं जा सकते। आखिर पानी बिना कब तक चलेगा? कैसे?
मैं अभी चमार बस्ती जाकर उनसे कहा आया, वो आते ही होंगे। आप ऐसा कीजिए, अपने अपने घर जाइए, घंटे भर बात किराएंगे, जाइए।
We saw how the Ravan image went on shrinking. Why? You have to think about this. Why the Ravan image is shrinking? Had shrunk so much. Though this Ravan was present all the time. It was shrinking, maybe because it was suggesting that this Brahmin priest had to dragged the Chamar's body himself. Probably there his power was reduced. Next is about another scene. This scene, if you remember, this young boy who has lost his wife and he wants to remarry, but he was not convinced in his mind. So he goes to this priest for advice, and the Brahmin priest quotes a sloka from Bhagavad Gita. This sloka was Vasansi Jiranani Yatha Vihaya Navani Gruhati Naroparani Tatha Sarirani Vihaya Jirananya Jnani Sanyati Navani Dehi. This is the scroll from Gita, Bhagavad Gita, and then he explains to the boy, जिस प्रकार आदमी पुराने कपड़ों को छोड़कर नए कपड़े धारण कर लेता है, उसी प्रकार आत्मा जर्जर शरीर को छोड़कर नया शरीर धारण कर लेती है। फिर बच्चा, तुझे समझना चाहिए कि तेरी घरवाली शरीर से भले मर गई हो, उसकी आत्मा जीवित है। This pleases the boy, and he thinks that he can easily get remarried. In fact, the Brahmin priest was justifying his own 3 marriages. I still believe, just listen to this, I still believe by adding this scene and the sloka from Bhagavad Gita, somehow Satyajit raised Brahmo mind. The Brahmo mind was lurking somewhere. The Brahmo mind was present. But somewhere he was critical of this from a Brahmo point of view. He doesn't say that, but I particularly, personally feel this is important in terms of leading us to larger discourse of the film, larger discourse of the Bhagavad Gita. What is the larger discourse? Next, please. Brahmin and the Bhagavad Gita, a larger discourse. This is important. If we get into this discourse and then look at this film, Satgati, it becomes quite complicated, very dialectical relationship that we can obtain from this. In the book, and then I would advise you to read a book by D.D. Kosambi, Myth and Reality. The first chapter of this book is about Bhagavad Gita, social and economic aspects of Bhagavad Gita. That's how he titles it. It is very material interpretation of Bhagavad Gita, very radical, very radical. He talks about Anu Gita. There's another Gita, and there are 2 Gitas. The first is main Gita, which was inflated. The Mahabharata was inflated, which is attributed to Vyasa. And what he says is interesting about this, which I will quote from his book, Myth and Reality. To put it bluntly, the utility of the Gita derives from its peculiar fundamental defect, namely dexterity in seeming to reconcile the irreconcilable. The high God repeatedly emphasizes the great virtue of non-killing, ahimsa, yet the entire discourse is an incentive to war. Imagine this contradiction. The entire discourse is about war, an incentive to war, but we are talking about ahimsa. This is quite unacceptable to Kosambi. And Gita said that it is impossible to kill or to be killed. The soul merely puts off an old body as a man his old clothes. That's what this Pandit tells the young boy. In exchange for new, it cannot be cut by weapons, nor suffer from fire, water, or the storm. So this body, this soul, Atma, is Amar. Atma is not affected by any of these things that we talk about. So this is important, larger discourse, which Kosambi, and Kosambi was not an ordinary scholar. He was a polymath. He was a numismatist, he was a mathematician, he was an archaeologist. His father, Dhammanand Kosambi, was a Pali scholar, a great Pali scholar, who taught at Oxford University. So this book becomes very important for indulging in this larger discourse of the film Sadgati. Sadgati seems very simple otherwise, but it has so many aspects to it. Now I will go to my own stories about Gappo. Yes, this is a quote from D.D. Kosambi's book. In addition to what I read, Once it is admitted that material reality is gross illusion, the rest follows quite simply. This is again interesting. If we consider everything is Maya, then you can argue in any which way you like and try to convince. This is how the Brahminical order, the upper caste hierarchy, always trampled and exploited the lower caste, illiterate, they call them uncivilized, they were not, but this poverty, the material poverty, which made them bow down to this Rakshasas in the form of Brahmin Pandits. This Brahminism that I'm talking about. Yes, next. Kappo, the stories. These are two interesting stories. They're my personal stories. One is, they relate to Sadgati. I was fortunate to witness one of the re-recording sessions that Satyajit Ray had at Rajkamal Kala Mandir film studios in Mumbai, where his favorite sound recordist Mangesh Desai worked. He always preferred to work with Mangesh Desai. He will always come down to Bombay to work with him for re-recording. It is a story 40 years old, and I still remember the dark re-recording room. Satyajit Ray was at his command. Mita Patil and Om Puri dubbing their voices for a Sadgati scene. Scene was this: Ser Baratha, Adhar Se Chawal. I was sitting in a remote corner. It was a dark room. Satyajit Ray was in Mumbai and he was staying at Shalimar Hotel at Camp's Corner. That time, the Amateur Film Society, headed by my senior scholar friend Vishnu Dharamsi, and Screen Unit that I was heading, had organized a small session of Satyajit Ray's film, Apu Trilogy, Teen Kanya, and his film on Rabindranath Tagore. On the occasion, we had brought out a cyclo-style but quite sumptuous publication. I can show you this publication. It is this is foolscap size paper, and this was the first page, which was screen printed by a member artist of ours, and this was cyclo-style. Completely, I typed it out like a great mimeograph. And if this book, this cyclo-style foolscap size publication is converted into a normal book, it can be 150 pages book. Okay? And it was full of information and analysis. Mr. Ray went through the almost entire, these pages, all the pages. And he liked it very much. He congratulated us. And he also inquired about what was going on in the western region of the Federation of Film Society, because at that time he was president of the Federation of Did the sound? Yeah. Unfortunately, he had very short time, and he had to leave for Calcutta.
So some noise is coming.
What is happening there?
Some noise is coming. I think from Professor Seal's camera. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
Yes. Yes.
So he regretted the fact that he could not come to inaugurate our session, but immediately pulled out a letterhead from the hotel letterhead and wrote down a very beautiful, in his calligraphic hand, message for our film society screenings of his films. And then he invited us to Rajkamal Kala Mandir, where he was re-recording Sadgati, and I went there. Mr. Dharamsi was also there, if I remember right. And it was a great occasion, it was a great fortune for me to witness Satyajit Ray working on re-recording. Re-recording, for your information, if I briefly explain, is the stage where all sounds are mixed, dialogues, music, voiceovers, all the sounds are mixed and level. Every sound is put in level, and that including dubbing sound. So all these sounds were put on a soundtrack by his favorite Mangesh Desai, the sound recordist, and that was the session that we are now looking at the scene, and then we see the actual re-recording session. Please. Sound, please. No sound, right? At least I'm not able to listen to. Pray Gugleswara. Anyway, he's saying that, will you remember, Ser Barata, Ada Se Chawal, non Haldi. £2 made around 1 kilogram or 1.2 kilograms. Sorry about this, there's no sound, which happens right at this time of pre-recording session. This was the re-recording at Rajkamal Kala Mandir studio in Mumbai, where I was present in the scene. There's no sound again. And Satyajit Ray himself was present when we met at Sandeep Ray's his house at 1 Bishop Lefroy Road in Calcutta last March, because the National Museum of Indian Cinema is setting up a special gallery, Satyajit Ray Gallery, and they have formed a committee of which I am a member. And we had a meeting with Sandeep Ray in his house last March. Because of Corona pandemic, it could not be proceeded further. But in this August, which happens to be the release month of release of Pathak Panchali, the gallery is likely to be set up. Sandeep Ray was also there during this session.
Jay, I think you need to unmute your mic and then share the screen.
Whose mic? Jay? This sound is important because this is part of re-recording. And how in the film you see this dialogue, Ada Se Chawal, and how the same dialogues were re-recorded in the studio, which we see Satyajit Ray himself. We are almost at the end, but this is important.
Sir, I have the recording. I have the
Okay,
clip.
okay.
Let me try to share
Hello.
it. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, play it.
Sir, I had some internet problem.
So
Okay,
can you do that?
Yes, I
Just let me
am.
try.
Okay, so Professor Sil, you are now doing it?
Let me try.
Okay.
Is internet okay with you, Jai Kolia, now?
I don't know. I have to use my mobile internet, and there was some problem regarding it.
So this is re-recording clip, therefore it is important. Very well.
Is it audible, sir?
Yes. Please go back.
आधा पाव घी
Go back and let's hear the whole, this one. Yes, audible. Just listen to this dialogue and then how they re-record in the studio. This was the process in the celluloid film production. In digital, different, it's easier. Because Mr. Ray always preferred sync sound. He didn't prefer dubbing much. The re-recording, of course, he had to do. It was leveling of the sounds. And he always did it at Rajkamal Kala Mandir with Mangesh Desai.
Okay. Shall I restart this clip, sir?
Yes, same dialogue. Ada Se
Same
Chawal.
dialogue. Okay.
मैं अभी चमार बस्ती जाकर उनसे कहा आया हूँ
आधा सेर चावल
Okay.
पाव भर दाल आधा पाव घी नॉन हल्दी याद रहेगा
हाँ
बोल तो
एक सेर चावल
शेर भर आटा
सेर भर आटा
हाँ आधा सेर चावल बोल
आधा सेर चावल
हाँ पाव भर दाल
पाव भर दाल,
आधा पाव घी,
आधा पाव घी,
नॉन हल्दी.
नॉन हल्दी.
Now see the re-recording session that he had, Satyajit Ray had in Bombay. And I was fortunate really to
शेर भर आटा.
सेर भर आटा,
हाँ. आधा सेर चावल. बोल.
आधा सेर चावल,
पाव भर दाल.
पाव भर दाल,
आधा पाव घी,
आधा पाव घी,
नॉन हल्दी. रहेगा.
and see Manikda.
एक सेर चावल,
शेर भर आटा.
सेर भर आटा,
आधा सेर चावल.
आधा सेर चावल,
पाव भर दाल.
पाव भर दाल,
आधा पाव घी,
आधा पाव घी,
नॉन हल्दी.
हल्दी.
बच्चों के किनारे पर चवन्नी रख देना. अच्छा मत. सेर भर आटा, आधा सेर चावल.
But don't do that slapping because it has been done with bangles already.
Oh, it's been done.
Yeah. It makes a slightly different sound if you have bangles. Lovely, more sort of tinkly kind of sound. I can't see.
This recording really.
Shall I
Yes.
pause here?
Yes, no. Please continue. Let's finish.
Lovely.
Yes, this was the re-recording session. This is how the whole film was re-recorded in Mumbai. All his films were re-recorded, most of his films in Mumbai. Now the second story was my meeting with Somendu Roy in Calcutta, in his house. I was in Calcutta and I had spent quite a bit of time at Technician Studio, where I met Soumitra Chattopadhyay, Ray's favorite actor, Pramod Lahiri, if you have heard his name. Pramod Lahiri had produced Ritik Ghatak's film Ajantrik and Bari Teke Paliye, and also met Satyajit Ray, cinematographer, as I told you, Somendu Roy. And then I went to his house, along with my friend Ajay Kumar Dey, who was at that time General Secretary of the Federation of Film Societies of India. And Somendu Dutt talked about two television films that Satyajit Ray had made. One, Piku's Day for the French television and Sadgati for the Indian television. He said he shot Sadgati like any other regular film on celluloid, without keeping television much in mind, though he had included some close-ups. And I think Sadgati had the maximum number of close-ups compared to his other films because of television. This is how the second story, he said many things about Aswani Sanket, that was the first film he shot, and Satyajit Ray had told him, please shoot this film as if we were shooting in black and white. It's quite interesting dialogue that we had. Next, please. Profane body and the sacred Brahmin. This profane and the sacred are coming together here. You are not able to divide them because he had to drag Chamar's body himself. So he made the noose and to drag him, to pull him. But this is the Vidamna and what I call Vidamna and Vish Chakra. Next, please. This is Premchand's. This was the last scene, and I find it quite dramatic, over dramatic, probably, which really doesn't match completely with the rest of the film. It is good to have this beautiful shot, but I'm a bit critical of this. Anyway, the story, Premchand ends slightly different from, it's like Devdas, Devdas story, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay, if you read and compare with the films, is quite different. You cannot do that in films, probably. Please run, and then there is a quote from the story. But the strong music is very minimal. This is the backyard where the chamars, the Dalits would dump animal carcasses. This is where Dukhi's body is dumped by the Brahmin. Sacred and profane have merged here. There is no binary between sacred and the profane. We see the skulls of cows and buffaloes here, but that's all. There was a quote from Premchand's story here. Here, this is how Premchand ends the story. उधर दुखी की लाश को खेत में गिदड़ और गिद्ध, कुत्ते और कौवे नोच रहे थे. यही जीवन पर्यंत की भक्ति, सेवा और निष्ठा का पुरस्कार था. Now you cannot show this probably in the film, how crows and dogs were eating this body. This is the story about Vidambana and Vishchakra. This is the irony of Dukhi. He cannot resist. He cannot say no. He was just accepting whatever circumstances were given to him, even at the cost of his life. And this vicious circle, that is Vishchakra, is this. This Ravan will be standing here in the enclave. The Dukhi will be passing through this. The Gashi Ram will have his sacredness back by a few drops of Ganga Jal, the holy water, and the story will go on. Till today, we have millions of Dukhiyas and Zuriyas and Danyas in this country. Satyajit Ray said that in 1981. I'm grateful to Jai, my wife Kuntal, and also my son Biplav for all the help. And thank you very much, every one of you. Thank you. Thank you, Jyotirmay.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful, scholarly, and engaging lecture. There might be a few questions among the audience. Would you attend them, sir, kindly?
If you have the time, yeah.
Okay. Yes, if you have any question, kindly unmute your mic and then ask directly.
Or what I suggest, if you are running short of time, they can send you the questions, whoever has, even afterwards, on email, and then you can forward those questions to me. I can answer them on email. But okay. Let you take a couple of questions now.
So I would kindly request Rita madam to wait for a few minutes so that you can answer the questions, sir.
All right.
Okay.
No problem at all. Please carry on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Yes.
First of all, yeah, I'm Santosh Kumar. I would like to just mention that the presentation that you have given about the film of Satyajit Ray, that is called the telefilm about telefilm of Satyajit Ray, which is called Sadgati, is quite wonderful. And I would also like to ask you a question which is very in general in the life of Satyajit Ray. Am I permitted to ask you that question, sir?
Yes, that's why you are there to ask the question.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
If I can answer it, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. So according to Father Gaston Roberts, who has conducted his research upon the works of Satyajit Ray, so he has published a book which is called Satyajit Ray Essays from 1970 to 2005, so which was published by Manohar Publishers, Delhi. In that particular book, at one particular point, Father Gaston Roberts, he has just quoted a phrase that Ray took off when Tagore signed out. Ray took off where Tagore signed out.
Okay.
This shows that is there any philosophical relation between Satyajit Ray and our Rabindranath Tagore? Could you briefly insight about that? Could you enlighten me upon that particular sentence?
Yes, it's a huge question, a lot. I knew Father Roberts personally. I had also visited his Chitrabani and have this book. I don't remember exactly, but Ray and Tagore cannot bifurcate. You cannot separate them. You know, I wrote an article recently about even in Apur Sansar and Aparajito, particularly Aparajito, you find Tagore there. It's not Tagore's story, But Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay and Tagore are coming together. The songs, if you remember in Apu Sansar, one song in the boat where Apu is going there to what town in Bangladesh in the boat, where he recites a Tagore song. And also when Apu and his friend are walking on the road at night in Calcutta after dinner, Apu is reciting Tagore song in Vibhuti Bhushan's Bandyopadhyay's story, the film. So Tagore off and on brings Tagore, Satyajit Ray off and on brings Tagore into context. If we read him properly, it's not just Tagore stories. He had not adapted many stories of Tagore, a couple of them, and made one film, the documentary, which was given to him by government of India, particularly Jawaharlal Nehru. And the philosophy of Tagore was anti-war, anti-nationalism, anti-anything which was myopic. That you find in, because both of them are Brahmo. This Brahmo philosophy comes in very often. In Sadgati, I see Brahmo philosophy there when Bhagavad Gita is there, as I told you. So Brahmo is important to me. Many people compare Bugman with Satyajit Ray. He's like Bugman. He cannot be like Bugman. Bugman had his own Christianity in his film. Satyajit Ray had not. Satyajit Ray was Brahmo, and we have to carefully look at that work, this philosophical aspect and how it reflects in their cinematographic work. So all these comparisons are so misplaced, I think, is so on the surface level. Tagore and Satyajit Ray, a lot can be written, and Father Robert has written so nicely about it. It's a very big question, but I don't know whether I've answered you briefly.
Yes, sir. I have got some information from your answer.
Thank you. But look at Apu Sansar.
Yes, sir.
And find Tagore there.
Yes, sir.
I don't think many people have written about Tagore in Apu Sansar and Aparajita.
Yeah.
But Tagore is very much there. With Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, which I find interesting. The two great writers are coming together. And this is, Satyajit Ray is bringing Tagore off and on into this discourse. Not in just his Gare Bahire or other films, Tin Kanya, which were direct adaptations. I call that transmutation of Tagore stories, which he changes a lot in that process. Sadgati is, though he said that he he stick to the original story, in a great fidelity, but he still has two major scenes, and one major scene was rain. Rain was natural; it just fell, and it was he said he was fortunate, and rain lasted for a couple of hours or 1 hour, and during that time they could shoot the entire scene of the rain, which fell without any expectation. It was sudden. But the rain scene works so well in Satyajit, if you remember.
Okay.
This was slightly beside the point, but Tagore and Ray, I think we have to again study in a different angle and perspective, probably. Though, thank you so much for raising this question.
Thank you, sir. I was really enlightened by the information that you have been given to me. Definitely, I will watch two films at Aparajito, Apu Sansar, and
particularly these two scenes. I wrote about that in Gujarati. When they are on the road, then Apu had sumptuous dinner from his friend Pulu. Pulu and Apu are walking at night on Calcutta Road, their deserted road, and police call them, at them, police shout at them. And there, Apu's mother has died, and he feels liberated somehow, and he recites Tagore's song on the road of Calcutta at night, particularly this scene. And then Pulu takes him to his niece's wedding, Sarmila Tagore. And there they sit in the boat. Apu has written a novel, which Pulu reads that in the boat. And there Apu, with his flute, recites a song, which is also Tagore's song.
Okay.
So the question is how he brings in Tagore in Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's story.
Yeah.
And that if you can expand this proposition, I think that'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for enlightening us. If any more question from any other one, please ask. We have a very short time. If you have any question, kindly ask directly and by unmuting your mic. Okay. I don't think there is any more question, and also we're running out of time, sir.
It doesn't matter. In case they have question later on,
yes, sir.
I can email them to you. The questions you can forward
Sure,
them.
sure. Obviously, sure, definitely.
They should not hesitate because it's difficult to imagine questions immediately after a lecture or presentation.
Okay, sir. Sure. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you once again. Thank you for kindly consenting us to attend this webinar as one of our esteemed resource persons. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for such an engaging lecture, engaging presentation. And I would now I would also take this opportunity to thank all the participants for taking a keen interest in this webinar. Thank you, sir.
Jyotirmoy, you should thank Rita Datta because he is the one.
Yes, definitely.
I must thank her.
Thank you, madam. Okay, now I would request Miss Aratrika Roy from the Department of English to take over. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Welcome, ma'am. Aratrika, please.
Thank you, sir, once again for such an enlightening lecture. Now, it is an honor and privilege on my part to introduce our next speaker, Professor Rita Dotto. She is a renowned film critic and assistant professor in the Department of Political Science of Maharaja Manindra Chandra College, Kolkata. She is also the editor of the journal Film Buff, and we are extremely fortunate to have her in the webinar. Today, she will be speaking on Ray and the City. So without further delay, over to you, ma'am.
হ্যাঁ, আমাকে কি শোনা যাচ্ছে একটু দেখুন?
একদম।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, আমি একটু বাংলা ইংরেজি মিশিয়ে বলবো, কারণ আমাদের স্টুডেন্টরা তো বেশিরভাগই বাংলায় কথা বলে, তো আমি ঠিক করলাম যে একটু বাংলা আর ইংলিশে মিশিয়ে বলবো আজকে। তা আমি প্রথমেই মালদা কলেজ ইংরেজি ডিপার্টমেন্ট, বিশেষত মালদা ফিল্ম সোসাইটি আর প্রিন্সিপাল স্যার প্রফেসর অনুরাধা কুন্দা ইংলিশ ডিপার্টমেন্ট এবং প্রফেসর জ্যোতির্ময় শীলকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ জানাচ্ছি, কারণ তারা আমাকে ইনভাইট করাতে আমার যেটা সুবিধা হয়েছে, আমি অনেকদিন বাদে নিজের কাজকর্মর ঠেলায় সত্যজিৎ রায়ের ছবি অনেকদিন দেখিনি, কিন্তু আমি আবার তাকে রিভিজিট করতে পেরেছি। আমার প্রিয় কিছু ছবিকে আমি রিভিজিট করেছি এই সুযোগে, সেই জন্য অনেক ধন্যবাদ। তো মূলত দেখুন, সত্যজিৎ রায় সম্পর্কে কোনো বক্তব্য পেশ করা না খুব কঠিন একটা ব্যাপার, কারণ আমরা বিশেষত বাঙালি হিসাবে, আমি প্যান ইন্ডিয়া বাদ দিয়ে বলছি, বাঙালি হিসাবে আমরা এত সত্যজিৎ রায়কে নিয়ে কথা বলেছি সারা জীবন, একাডেমিক লেকচারে, আড্ডাতে ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি, যে আমার মনে হয় না সত্যজিৎ রায়কে নিয়ে আর কিছু মানে বলার বাকি থেকে গেছে কিনা। এবার তবু আপনারা যখন ভালোবেসে আমাকে ডেকেছেন, আমি যেটা করব, আমার কিছু ভাবনা চিন্তা আমি একটু শেয়ার করবো আর কি, এবং তারপরে যদি কোনো প্রতর্ক বা ডিসকোর্সের জন্ম হয় তাহলে তো খুবই ভালো ব্যাপার আর কি, আমরা কন্টিনিউ করতে পারি সেটা। এখন বিষয়টা হচ্ছে যে সত্যজিৎ রায়ের কোন ছবিগুলো আমি ধরবো। এবার অসংখ্য ছবি, মানে শর্ট, ডকুমেন্টারি, ফিচার ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি অসংখ্য ছবি আছে। এবার আমরা সব ছবি নিয়ে কথা বলতে গেলে তো ইটস এনাফ ফর দ্য লাইফ টাইম, তো আমরা সেখানে আর আমি বিশেষ কয়েকটা ছবির কথা বলবো, এবং আমি যে সময়সীমাটা ধরেছি সেটা হচ্ছে 1947 থেকে 1977। 1947 থেকে 1977 এই পিরিয়ডাইজেশনটা আমি করছি কারণ আমি ধরুন বিখ্যাত সমাজবিজ্ঞানী পার্থ চ্যাটার্জির একটা লেখা আছে স্টেট অ্যান্ড পলিটিক্স ইন ইন্ডিয়া, সেখানে অতুল কোহলির একটা খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং লেখা আছে ফ্রম ব্রেকডাউন টু অর্ডার। সেখানে আমি বলছি যে এই পোস্ট ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্ট মানে 47 থেকে 77 এই 30 বছর যদি আমরা দেখি পশ্চিমবঙ্গের রাজনীতি, পশ্চিমবঙ্গের পলিটিক্যাল হিস্ট্রি, তাহলে আমরা দেখবো যে মূলত ওই সময়টা যত রকম টিদিং প্রবলেম আছে, মানে দাঁত ওঠার যে সমস্যা আর কি, এই সমস্যাগুলো সবই ওই সময় খুব বেশি মাত্রায় ছিল। সেই সমস্যা হয়তো আজও আছে, সব দেশে সব রাজ্যে সব সময় থাকে, কিন্তু ওই সময় মনে রাখতে হবে যে একটা সদ্য স্বাধীন হওয়া একটা দেশ, তার একটা রাজ্য, তার একটা শহর, সেখানে আমাদের পরপর পরপর এমন সমস্ত ঘটনাবলী ঘটে যাচ্ছে একের পর একটায়, যে আমরা অনেকটা মানে কনফিউজড আর কি, মানে আমাদের এক্সিস্টেন্স নিয়ে ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি। সেখানে আমরা অনেক ঘটনাবলী দেখব, সেগুলো আমরা পরে আলোচনা করছি যে পলিটিক্যাল হিস্ট্রিতে এক্স্যাক্টলি কি কি সামাজিক আন্দোলন, কি সোশ্যাল মুভমেন্ট ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি হয়েছে। এখন এই সময়সীমাটা আমি তাহলে ওই নির্ধারণ করে নিলাম 1947 থেকে 77, যখন ক্যালকাটা was a city of turbulence আর কি, ওই সময়টা আমি ধরছি। ওই সত্যজিৎ রায়ের যে শহর কেন্দ্রিক ছবিগুলো আর কি, সেইগুলো নিয়েই আমি মূলত কথা বলবো। আর এখানে আমি আরেকটা যে মানে থিওরির কথা বলতে চাই, সেটা হচ্ছে আশিস নন্দীর একটা খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং লেখা আছে, অ্যাম্বিগুয়াস জার্নি টু দ্য সিটি। এই বইটাতে খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং কিছু চ্যাপ্টার আছে, আপনারা যদি কখনো পড়েন, 4টে চ্যাপ্টার আছে। এই চ্যাপ্টার গুলোতে উনি কিছু জার্নির কথা বলেছেন। এই জার্নিগুলো খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং। যেমন ধরুন, প্রথম জার্নিটাকে উনি বলছেন, যে চ্যাপ্টারে উনি লিখছেন যে জার্নি টু দ্য পাস্ট অ্যাজ দ্য জার্নি ইনটু দ্য সেলফ। সেখানে উনি সাবহেডিং দিচ্ছেন দ্য রিমেম্বার্ড ভিলেজ অ্যান্ড দ্য পয়জনড সিটি। আর সেকেন্ডলি উনি আরেকটা জার্নির কথা বলছেন, দ্য জার্নি টু দ্য ভিলেজ অ্যাজ দ্য জার্নি টু দ্য সেলফ। এই বিষয়টা উনি বলছেন, এবং লাস্ট উনি চ্যাপ্টারটা শেষ করছেন, দ্য ইনভিজিবল হলোকাস্ট অ্যান্ড দ্য জার্নি অ্যাজ অ্যান এক্সোডাস, দ্য পয়জন ভিলেজ অ্যান্ড দ্য স্ট্রেঞ্জার সিটি। এই কয়েকটা চ্যাপ্টারে উনি ভাগ করে দেখাচ্ছেন যে আমাদের জীবনে আমরা অনেকগুলো জার্নি করি। এই জার্নিগুলো কিছুটা হতে পারে মানস ভ্রমণ, মানে ধরুন আমরা এখন কোভিড প্যান্ডেমিকে বাড়ি বসে আছি, আমরা কোনো সময় হয়তো শান্তিনিকেতন বেড়াতে গিয়েছিলাম, তো আমরা যদি এখন ভীষণ শান্তিনিকেতন যেতে চাইছি কিন্তু পারছি না, তো আমরা কি করছি, বাড়িতে বসে চোখ বন্ধ করে একটু শান্তিনিকেতন বেরিয়ে নিলাম, এটা হচ্ছে মানস ভ্রমণ। আরেকটা বিষয় হচ্ছে যে সশরীরে আমরা একটা জায়গা থেকে আরেকটা জায়গায় জার্নি করছি, মানে একটা বিন্দু থেকে আরেকটা বিন্দুতে যাচ্ছি, এইটা হচ্ছে টেরিস্ট্রিয়াল ভ্রমণ বা ফিজিক্যাল জার্নি। এবার আমরা যখন সত্যজিৎ রায়ের ছবিকে ধরছি, তখন আমরা যদি প্রথম পথের পাঁচালীকে ধরি, তখন আমরা দেখবো যে পথের পাঁচালী তো আমরা সবাই জানি যে একটা মূলত গ্রাম নির্ভর একটা ছবি, সেখানে শহর হয়তো কিছু কথোপকথনে আসবে, বা শহর আছে কোথাও একটা, আমরা জানি একটা ট্রেন পাস করে, সেটা হয়তো শহর থেকে আসে বা শহরে যায়, ইত্যাদি আমরা হাইপোথেটিক্যালি ধরে নিচ্ছি। এইবার যখন প্রথম আমরা শহরকে দেখছি সত্যজিৎ রায়ের ছবিতে, সেটা কিন্তু মূলত 1956-এ অপরাজিততে, যেখানে অপু একটা জার্নি করে, মাইন্ড ইউ, সে কিন্তু ডাইরেক্ট কলকাতায় আসে না, সে নিশ্চিন্দপুর থেকে বেনারস যায়, বারাণসী থেকে সে কিন্তু কলকাতায় আসে, এবং সে আসে জীবিকার সন্ধানে, যেখানে তার যে রুট, তার শেকড়, তার মা তাকে ছেড়ে সে আসছে, এবং তার বাবা মারা যায় বারাণসীতে, বেনারসে, সেখান থেকে সে কলকাতায় আসছে, সে হ্যারিসন রোডে এসে দাঁড়াচ্ছে, সে রয়্যাল প্রেসে ঢুকছে জীবিকার সন্ধানে। সেখানে কিন্তু অপুর কাছে এই শহর কিন্তু এলিয়েন সিটি, মানে সে চেনা শহর নয়, সে অচেনা শহর, সে একটি গ্রামের ছেলে, গ্রাম থেকে সে জীবিকা নির্বাহ করতে আসছে। কিন্তু মুশকিল হচ্ছে যে যখন আমরা অপুর সংসার দেখছি ঠিক তারপরে 1959-এ, তখন আমরা দেখছি যে অপু কিন্তু এখানে অনেক বেশি সাবলীল, এখানে অপু অনেক বেশি ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্ট, অনেক বেশি সে বড় হয়ে গেছে, সে শহরকে বুঝতে শিখেছে, শহর তাকে চিনেছে, সে শহরকে চিনেছে, সুতরাং তাদের মধ্যে অলরেডি আমরা দেখছি একটা যোগসূত্র স্থাপন হয়ে গেছে। এবার মূলত এই অপু সংসার হচ্ছে একটা স্বাধীনতা উত্তর সময়কালে এক আধুনিক দম্পতির যাত্রার কথা। অপু এখানে তার চোখে অনেক স্বপ্ন, এই প্রথম কিন্তু আমরা ক্যামেরাকে অনেক বেশি আউটডোরে দেখছি, অনেক বেশি সেটা শহরে রয়েছে, শহরের রাস্তাঘাট, ট্রাম, বাস, অপুর জার্নি, অপুর বন্ধুর সাথে দেখা করা, কাজের সন্ধানে এখানে ওখানে যাওয়া ইত্যাদিতে আমরা শহরকে কিন্তু ভিজিবলি অনেক বেশি দেখতে পাচ্ছি, মানে ফিজিক্যালি অনেক বেশি দেখতে পাচ্ছি, যা আমরা কিন্তু পথের পাঁচালীতে দেখিনি, মানে সেটার গল্পের প্রেক্ষাপটই আলাদা ছিল। এখন সেখানে ও যখন অপু যখন সার্টিফিকেট লিখতে যায় আর কি তার মাস্টারমশাইয়ের কাছে, সেখানে ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডে আমরা একটা ইনকলাব জিন্দাবাদ, শহরের ভেতরের টার্মোয়েল, সেগুলো আমরা শুনতে পাই আর কি। কারণ মনে রাখতে হবে, ক্যালকাটা ওয়াজ দ্য সিটি অফ ইনসেসেন্ট পলিটিক্যাল র্যালিজ, প্রোটেস্টস অ্যান্ড আপহিভেলস ওই সময়। সুতরাং গ্রাম থেকে আসা যে সহায় সম্বলহীন পরিবারহীন অপূর্ব কুমার মুখোপাধ্যায় তার কলকাতা শহরে থাকা এবং তার যে জার্নিটা টুয়ার্ডস দ্য সিটি, সেটা যেন মেটাফরিক্যালি মানে রূপক ধর্মী ভাবে কলকাতা শহরের মানে স্বাধীন ভারতের যে কোনো নাগরিকের গল্প হতে পারত। অপু তার জাস্ট রিপ্রেজেন্টেশন করছে আর কি। এটা বেসিক্যালি একটি গ্রামের ছেলের শহরে একজন আধুনিক ব্যক্তি মানুষ হয়ে ওঠা, একজন মডার্ন ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল হয়ে ওঠা। অপর্ণার সাথে তার যে স্বল্পকালীন দাম্পত্য, সেই সময়ে সে শহরকে ভালোবাসতে শিখছে এবং অপর্ণার অকাল মৃত্যু এই শহরকেই তার কাছে করে তুলছে পয়জন সিটি। সে তখন কিন্তু এই শহর ছেড়ে চলে যাচ্ছে, সে অন্য একটা জার্নি করছে কোনো অজানার উদ্দেশ্যে। এবং সেখান থেকে সে যখন আবার ফিরে আসছে তার ছেলের কাছে, কাজলের কাছে, তার শেকড়ের সন্ধানে, কাজলকে পিঠে চাপিয়ে সেই যে বিখ্যাত দৃশ্য, আমি ভিডিওগুলো দেখাতে পারছি না, আমার টেকনিক্যাল একটু প্রবলেম আছে, আমার ভিডিও চলছিল না, সেই জন্য আমি ধরে নিচ্ছি সত্যজিৎ রায়ের ছবি কম বেশি আমরা সবাই দেখেছি, সেই জন্য আমি ওই স্মৃতি নির্ভর জায়গা থেকে আমি কথাটা বলছি, কারণ আমি জানি বেশিরভাগই তোমরা দেখেছো বা আপনারা দেখেছেন। তো সেখানে কাজলকে পিছে বসিয়ে সে যখন জার্নিটা শুরু করছে, হাইপোথেটিক্যালি আমরা ধরে নিচ্ছি সে হয়তো শহরের দিকেই যাচ্ছে। সুতরাং আমরা এটা জানা সত্ত্বেও যে সিটি ইজ আ পয়জন সিটি, আমরা তার ইনএভিটেবিলিটিকে এড়াতে পারছি না, আমরা তার অনিবার্যতাকে এড়াতে পারছি না, কারণ বাই দেন সিটি হ্যাজ এনগালফড আস, টেম্পটেড আস with its extravaganza, developmental spree and other kinds of temptation. গ্রাম তখন হয়ে গেছে একদম নস্টালজিয়ার ব্যাপার। আশিস নন্দীকে যদি আমি কোট করি তাহলে আই কোট হিম, নন্দী বলছেন possessing only sentimental value, মানে ভিলেজ তখন is possessing sentimental value, there can be only an imaginary journey back to the village, in reality there can be no return, এটা উনি বলছেন। ফলে এই ইনএভিটেবিলিটিকে নিয়তি করে এই নাগরিকরা বেঁচে থাকছে। এবার 1963-তে পরের যে ছবিটাতে শহর প্রকট ভাবে আসছে, প্রকট ভাবে, যে কারণে সিনেমার নামই হচ্ছে দ্য বিগ সিটি, মহানগর, 1963। এতদিন আমরা দেখছি অপূর্ব কুমার মুখোপাধ্যায়ের জার্নি, এবার আমরা দেখব আরতি মজুমদারের জার্নি। এই জার্নিটাও শহরের বুকেই কিন্তু হচ্ছে। এখানে আমরা একটা নিম্নবিত্ত পরিবারকে দেখি যারা হয়তো রিফিউজি, কারণ তারা পাবনা থেকে এসেছে বোঝা যাচ্ছে, এবং সেখানে সুব্রত কুমার মজুমদার তার যে হাজবেন্ড সে একটা ব্যাংকে চাকরি করে, এবং আরতি কিন্তু একটা গৃহবধূ, সে তার সাথে কিন্তু আমরা শহরের যোগাযোগ দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। যখনই আমরা প্রথম শহরকে দেখছি আমরা সুব্রত রানাগোনার মাধ্যমে বা এমনি শহরকে দেখছি আর কি। কিন্তু পরবর্তীকালে যখন তার, আমরা সকলেই জানি যে আরতির সংসারে একটা অর্থনৈতিক সংকট সবসময় ছিল, এবং অল অফ আ সাডেন সে মনে করে যে তারও কন্ট্রিবিউট করা দরকার সংসারে, এবং তখন সে একটা চাকরির সন্ধানে বেরোয় ফর দ্য ফার্স্ট টাইম। এই যে তার বেরোনো, সেটাই কিন্তু কলকাতার সাথে তার প্রথম যোগাযোগ হচ্ছে, তাকে আমরা কলকাতা শহরে প্রথম দেখতে পাচ্ছি আর কি। তার আগে কিন্তু তাকে আমরা ঘরের চার দেওয়ালের মধ্যেই দেখেছি। সুতরাং এই যে ট্র্যাডিশন আর আধুনিকতার ক্রস রোডে আরতি দাঁড়িয়ে রইল, এবং তারপরে সে শহরের বুকে পা বাড়ালো, এবং প্রথম সে সুব্রত কুমার মজুমদারের সাথে ট্রামে করে মিশন রোডে মুখার্জি কোম্পানিতে জয়েন করতে গেল। এই জার্নিটা কিন্তু সেও আর একটা জার্নি করছে শহরের বুকে, এবং ধীরে ধীরে সে বস এবং অন্যান্যদের খুব প্রিয় পাত্রী হয়ে ওঠে তার কাজের মাধ্যমে। এবং এরপরে আমরা যতবার কিন্তু ক্যামেরা আরতিকে ফলো করছে শহরের মধ্যে, আমরা আরতিকে দেখি সে অনেক বেশি সাবলীল। সে ততদিনে হয়তো এই চাকরি বা এই শহরের মধ্যে তার আনাগোনা তাকে অনেক বেশি সাবলীল করে তুলেছে, অনেক বেশি তার আইডেন্টিটি খুঁজতে সাহায্য করেছে, এবং সেই আইডেন্টিটি কিন্তু সেই সিটির মানে শহরের যে স্পেস তার মধ্যেই কিন্তু সে খুঁজে পাচ্ছে। ফলে পরবর্তীকালে আমরা দেখতে পাই, আমি গল্পটা একটুখানি আরেকবার বলছি কারণ মানে একটুখানি গল্প বলছি কারণ আমাকে সূত্রটা ধরতে সুবিধা হবে বলে। এবং একটা সময় যখন সবই ঠিকঠাক চলছে, সে প্রসপারও করছে অফিসে, তখন তার যে কলিগ, অ্যাংলো ইন্ডিয়ান কলিগ এডিথ সিমন্স, তার সাথে যখন তার বস হিমাংশু মুখার্জির বচসা হচ্ছে, তখন কিন্তু তার প্রতিবাদে আরতি হঠাৎ করেই অনেকদিন আগে লিখে রাখা রেজিগনেশন লেটারটা বসের দিকে ছুড়ে দিচ্ছে। সে জানে যে সে তার ওই রেজিগনেশন তখন অ্যাফোর্ড করতে পারে না, শি ক্যানট অ্যাফোর্ড টু লুজ হার জব, কিন্তু তারপরেও সে একটা কিন্তু নৈতিকতার জায়গা থেকে, এথিক্সের জায়গা থেকে, তার বন্ধুর প্রতি লয়ালটির জায়গা থেকে কিন্তু সে ওই প্রতিবাদটা করে। এরপর শেষে যখন ফাইনালি রেজিগনেশন দেওয়ার পর আমরা দেখি যে আরতি তার স্বামীর সাথে মহানগরে আবার মিলিয়ে যাচ্ছে এক অনির্দিষ্ট ভবিষ্যতের পথে, হয়তো তারা আরেকটা জার্নি শুরু করছে, এবং সিটি সেখানে মানে একটা টপ শটে গিয়ে আমরা শহরটাকে ওয়াইড অ্যাঙ্গেলে দেখছি, কারণ আমরা তখন শহরটা জেগে থাকে আর কি, সিটি লুমস লার্জ ওইভাবে রয়েছে। ফলে এবং এর মানে আরতি যখন প্রথম বেরোয় আর কি শহরের পথে, তখন মনে রাখতে হবে তার স্বামী তাকে বাড়িতে বলেছিল যে ওমেন্স প্লেস ইজ ইন দ্য হোম, ঘরের বউ শুড স্টে এট ঘর এন্ড নট বিচরণ। কিন্তু ইভেনচুয়ালি আরতির যে উত্তরণ হয় অ্যাজ অ্যান ইন্ডিভিজুয়াল, আধুনিক এক নারী হিসাবে যে উত্তরণ, তার কেন্দ্রবিন্দুতে কিন্তু কলকাতা শহর রয়েছে, যেটা আমরা ভিজুয়ালি দেখছি যে শহরের ট্রামের যে টিকি সেইখান থেকে সে শুরু হয়ে শেষ হচ্ছে শহরের টপ শটে, একটা জুম আউট করে জুম ইন করছে আবার ল্যাম্প পোস্টের মধ্যে, যেখানে ওয়ান ল্যাম্প ইজ মিসিং। এবং সেটা নিয়ে সত্যজিতের একটা খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং অ্যানেকডট আছে, সেটা আমি আর বলছি না। এবার মহানগর কিন্তু শেষ হচ্ছে উইথ আ সার্টেন কাইন্ড অফ হোপ, অ্যাসিওরেন্স অ্যান্ড অ্যাওয়েকেনিং, হোপ ফর আ বেটার ফিউচার, কারণ তখনও কিন্তু একটা ভবিষ্যৎ সম্পর্কে একটা আমাদের পজিটিভ একটা ভাইব তখনও রয়েছে। এরপরে যখন ধরো আমরা এর ঠিক আগের ছবি 1962 কাঞ্চনজঙ্ঘা বা 1969 অরণ্যের দিন রাত্রি দেখছি, তখন কিন্তু যে লোকগুলোকে দেখছি, যে ক্যারেক্টার গুলোকে দেখছি, তারা সবাই কিন্তু আরবান, তারা শহুরে, তারা জঙ্গলে যাচ্ছে বা পাহাড়ে যাচ্ছে। শহর তাদের যে ক্রাইসিসের জন্ম দিয়েছে, সেই ক্রাইসিস কনফ্লিক্ট রেজলিউশন করতে তারা হয়তো শহরে জঙ্গলে যাচ্ছে বা পাহাড়ে যাচ্ছে, হয়তো কনফ্লিক্ট রিজলভ হচ্ছে বা হচ্ছে না, কিন্তু ফাইনালি কিন্তু তাদেরকে শহরেই ফিরতে হচ্ছে। সুতরাং আমি ওই সিনেমাগুলোর ডিটেলসে যাচ্ছি না। আবার যেখানে দেবীকে আমরা দেখছি 1960 বা চারুলতাকে, সেখানে কিন্তু কলকাতা অনেক বেশি ফিউডাল কলকাতা। এই চারুলতা দেবীতে কলকাতা কিন্তু প্রমিনেন্ট নয়, কিন্তু প্রমিনেন্ট জায়গা হচ্ছে রায়ের ফেমাস ক্যালকাটা ট্রিলজি, যেটা ট্রিলজি হিসাবে বানানো হয়নি, 70, 71, 75, কিন্তু যখন আমরা ক্যাটেগরাইজ করি তখন সেটা ট্রিলজি হিসাবেই দেখি, যেখানে তিনি কিন্তু রায়কে কিন্তু অলরেডি তখন সবাই বলতে শুরু করেছে যে হি ইজ এ বুর্জোয়া ফিল্ম মেকার, কারণ প্রেসিডেন্সি কলেজের ছাত্ররা ভীষণ ক্ষিপ্ত, তারা বলছে এত সমস্যা হচ্ছে, দের ইজ দিস ফুড ক্রাইসিস, রিফিউজি প্রবলেম, 1971, 1941, 47 পার্টিশন, সেখানে নকশালবাড়ি মুভমেন্ট, সেখানে ইমার্জেন্সি 1975, কিন্তু ওয়াই রায় ইজ নট রেসপন্ডিং টু দিস ইভেন্টস, মানে কেন তিনি কথা বলছেন না এইসব ব্যাপারে? কারণ তিনি বাই দেন ইজ রিগার্ডেড এজ দ্য কালচারাল আইকন, সেই জন্য সবাই চাইছেন যে সে রেসপন্ড করুক। এখন অ্যান্ড্রু রবিনসন তার বায়োগ্রাফিতে লিখছেন, ইনা রাইতে তিনি লিখছেন যে শহরের শিক্ষিত জেনারেশনের এরকম ভাবে রায়ের দিকে বিভিন্ন রকম অ্যাকুইজিশন ছুড়ে দিচ্ছে, এবং ইভেন তার বন্ধু ঘনিষ্ঠ বন্ধু চিদানন্দ দাশগুপ্ত লিখছেন, আমরা সবাই জানি যে ক্যালকাটা অফ বার্নিং ট্রামস, অফ কমিউনাল রাইটস, রিফিউজিজ, আনএমপ্লয়মেন্ট, রাইজিং প্রাইসেস অ্যান্ড ফুড শর্টেজ ডাজ নট এক্সিস্ট ইন হিজ ফিল্মস। এটা চিদানন্দ বাবু লিখছেন। হ্যাঁ, তো অ্যাজ এ রেজাল্ট রায় নিজে শহরকে বলছেন 1971-এ যে ইটস আ নাইটমেয়ার সিটি। তিনি মারি সিটনকে লিখছেন যে তিনি শহর ছেড়ে যাওয়ার কথা ভাবছেন, পরবর্তীকালে তিনি আবার মত বদলাচ্ছেন এবং সিটনকেই লিখছেন যে ফর মি ক্যালকাটা ইজ দ্য প্লেস টু ওয়ার্ক, the place to live, so you take what comes, you accept the fact of change, সেটাও কিন্তু তিনি বলছেন। আর ছবি বানানোটা তার কাছে রীতিমতো তখন চ্যালেঞ্জিং মনে হচ্ছে, কারণ 1970-এ তিনি তৈরি করছেন প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বী, যেটা তার মতে দ্য মোস্ট প্রভোকেটিভ ফিল্ম, এবং সেখানে কিন্তু সিদ্ধার্থ প্রোটাগনিস্ট, সে বেকার শিক্ষিত, তার বিধবা মা, তার বোন সুদীপা, তার ভাই টুনু, সেখানে সুনীল গাঙ্গুলির গল্পকে তিনি নিজের মতো করে নিচ্ছেন, এবং বিটুইন টুনু দ্য নকশালাইট এন্ড সুদীপা দ্য লিবারেটেড ওম্যান স্ট্যান্ডস রাইস প্রোটাগনিস্ট সিদ্ধার্থ। কারণ তিনি এর কারণটা ব্যাখ্যা করছেন যে কেন তিনি সিদ্ধার্থকে প্রোটাগনিস্ট হিসেবে দিচ্ছেন, সেটা আমার খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং লেগেছে, কারণ তিনি সিনিয়স্ট পত্রিকার একটা ইন্টারভিউতে বলছেন, and I quote him, you can see my attitude in the adversary. Adversary হচ্ছে প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বীর ইংরেজি নাম আর কি। where you have two brothers. The younger brother is a Naxalite. There is no doubt that the elder brother admires the younger brother for his bravery and conviction. The film is not ambiguous about that. As a filmmaker, however, I was more interested in the elder brother because he is the vacillating character. সুতরাং টুনুকে নিয়ে ওনার কিছু বলার নেই, কারণ টুনু ইজ ইন্টারেস্টিং ক্যারেক্টার, কারণ দ্য ইয়াঙ্গার ব্রাদার হ্যাজ অলরেডি আইডেন্টিফাইড হিমসেলফ with the cause that makes him a part of the total attitude and makes him unimportant. The Naxalite movement takes over and he as a person becomes insignificant. সুতরাং সিদ্ধার্থের এই ভ্যাসিলেটিং ক্যারেক্টারটাই তার খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং মনে হয়েছে। আর প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বী যে সময় ঘটছে সেই সময় কিন্তু কলকাতা শহর ভীষণ উত্তাল, তখন কলকাতা ভায়োলেন্ট, এবং মাইন্ড ইউ অনেক সময় অনেক ছবি থাকে এবং সেই সময় যখন ঘটনা ঘটে আর কি, সেই সময় কোনো ছবি কিন্তু সেটা ইমিডিয়েট রেসপন্স করতে পারে না, তাকে সেটা বুঝতে সময় লাগে, সেটা পার্কোলেট ডাউন করতে সময় লাগে ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি। কিন্তু যখন কিন্তু রায় কিন্তু সেই সময়কার কলকাতার ইমিডিয়েট উত্তরটা দিয়েছিলেন প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বী বা জনঅরণ্য বা সীমাবদ্ধের মাধ্যমে। শহর এখানে একটা সময়ের আর্কাইভ হয়ে যাচ্ছে, মানে আমরা যদি এখন শহরকে দেখতে যাই 1970-তে যখন আমরা জন্মাইনি, তখন কিন্তু আমরা এই সত্যজিৎ রায়ের ছবিগুলোকে দেখে অনেকটাই শহরটাকে বুঝতে পারবো, এবং সেটা ন্যারেটিভে তো খুব প্রমিনেন্টলি রয়েছে, তার ফর্ম এবং স্ট্রাকচারের মধ্যেও খুব বেশি মাত্রায় আছে। এবং এই অ্যাডভার্সারিতে বা প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বীতে কিন্তু কলকাতা ভীষণ প্রমিনেন্টলি আছে। মানে সিদ্ধার্থের যদি আমরা শুধু হাঁটা চলাটা ফলো করি, ক্যামেরা যাকে যেভাবে ফলো করছে, সেই সিদ্ধার্থের বড় বেশি রাস্তায় হাঁটছে, সে ইন্টারভিউ দিতে যাচ্ছে, তার ভায়োলেন্ট জনগণের সাথে মিশে যাওয়া, এবং একই শহরে যে অনেকগুলো শহর আছে সেগুলো কিন্তু এই অ্যাডভার্সারিতে আমরা দেখছি। সিদ্ধার্থের নিজের নিম্নবিত্ত পরিবার, সিদ্ধার্থের বান্ধবী কেয়ার অপেক্ষাকৃত উচ্চবিত্ত পরিবার, তার বোন সুদীপার বসের একটা ভয়ঙ্কর উচ্চবিত্ত পরিবার, সে সবকিছু মিলিয়ে there are many cities within the city। কিন্তু শেষ পর্যন্ত আমরা দেখছি সিদ্ধার্থ আপোষ করতে পারছে না, সে একটা জার্নি করছে। আবার মনে রাখবে সেই জার্নিটা কিন্তু ব্যাক টু দ্য ভিলেজ, মানে আবার সেই মফস্বলে সে ফিরে যাচ্ছে চাকরি নিয়ে, এবং সেখানে সেই পয়জন সিটিকে হয়তো ছেড়ে চলে গেল। সীমাবদ্ধ পরের ছবি 1971 কোম্পানি লিমিটেড, সেখানে কিন্তু আমরা একটা কমপ্লিটলি অন্য ক্লাসে চলে গেলাম আর কি। সেখানে আমরা একটা এতদিন আমরা একটা নিম্নবিত্ত পরিবার, তার স্ট্রাগল, তার বেঁচে থাকা ইত্যাদি, তার এভরিডে লাইফ দেখছি। আর তারপরে আমরা চলে গেলাম হচ্ছে সীমাবদ্ধে, যেখানে কিন্তু আমরা একটা উচ্চবিত্ত পরিবার, সেখানে একজন আদর্শবাদী ছাত্র, সে শেক্সপিয়ার আওড়ায়, সে মফস্বল থেকে, অপেক্ষাকৃত মফস্বল থেকে কলকাতায় আসে এবং ধীরে ধীরে সাফল্যের চূড়ায় সে উঠতে থাকে। সে হিন্দুস্তান পিটার্সে চাকরি করে এবং হোয়াট এভার ইট টেক্স, মানে তাকে সাফল্য পেতে গেলে যা করতে হবে, যা ম্যানিপুলেশন, কম্প্রোমাইজ যা দরকার, সবই সে খুব সুদক্ষভাবে করে। এবং এই ছবিটা কিন্তু আমরা দেখছি হচ্ছে টুটুলের চোখ দিয়ে। টুটুল কিন্তু আবার পাটনা থেকে আসছে, মানে সেটা আবার একটা মেট্রোপলিস নয়, সেখান থেকে সে আসছে, তার একটা জার্নি হচ্ছে টুয়ার্ডস কলকাতা, এবং সেখানে কিন্তু সে এক ধরনের বিবেকের ভূমিকায় কাজ করছে, আমরা সেটা জানি। টুটুলের চোখ দিয়ে আমরা এই ক্ষয়িষ্ণু শহরটাকে দেখছি। আর তারপরে আফটার আ ব্রেক 1975-এ তিনি যখন জনঅরণ্য করছেন দ্য মিডল ম্যান, তখন তিনি শহরের আরো নিচু তলার কথা বলছেন। তখন তিনি বস্তিকে দেখছেন, তিনি সোমনাথকে দেখছেন, তিনি ক্ষয়িষ্ণু এডুকেশন সিস্টেমকে দেখছেন। তিনি এখানে শহর কিন্তু আরো বেশি রুথলেস। এন্ড বাই দেন আমরা জেনে গেছি তিনি যে আমাদের এই ট্রিপটাতে নিয়ে গেছেন এই ছবি, তিনটে ছবির মাধ্যমে, তাতে আমরা বুঝে গেছি যে শহরের কিছু করার নেই। ইট হ্যাজ বিকাম দ্য করাপ্টিং এজেন্সি, so much so that we have perhaps internalized and naturalized it by now, no further questions asked, এরকম একটা পজিশনে চলে গেছে ব্যাপারটা। তো ইট ওয়াজ আ টাইম অফ, মানে সুপ্রিয়া চৌধুরীর একটা খুব ইন্টারেস্টিং লেখা আছে অপু অ্যান্ড আফটারে, সেখানে উনি বলছেন যে ইট ওয়াজ আ টাইম অফ ইন্টেন্স ফ্রাস্ট্রেশন অ্যান্ড অ্যাঙ্গার অফ অ্যান আরবান ডেসপায়ার that could produce radical violence as well as middle class fear, anxiety and degradation। তো এবং আমরা এই সবকটা ছবি দেখার পর শহরকে যেভাবে যেভাবে দেখছি, তারপরে শেষ পর্যন্ত দেখুন সত্যজিৎ রায়ের যে লাস্ট ছবি আগন্তুক 1991-এ, সেখানে কিন্তু সারা বিশ্ব ভ্রমণ করে আসা মনমোহন মিত্র যখন প্রশ্ন তোলেন শহর এবং সভ্যতা নিয়ে, তখন শেষ পর্যন্ত কিন্তু তিনি ঠাঁই নেন আদিবাসী গ্রামে। ফলে তার কিন্তু সেই গ্রামে ফিরে যাওয়া, জার্নি টু দ্য সেন্টার অফ দ্য সেলফ, যেটা আমি বলছিলাম, সবচেয়ে ইন্টারেস্টিং বিষয় হচ্ছে যে সত্যজিৎ রায়ের তো ভিজুয়াল ইমেজে আমরা সিটিকে দেখলাম, কিন্তু সত্যজিৎ রায়ের শহরের জন্য কিন্তু অনেক কন্ট্রিবিউশন আছে। মানে সত্যজিৎ রায় কিন্তু শহরকে শুধু ভিজুয়াল ইমেজে ধরেছিলেন তা নয়, কলকাতা শহরের সংস্কৃতি কৃষ্টি যেটা সারা পৃথিবীতে ব্যাপ্ত। মানে আমি ইস্ট ইউরোপের প্রত্যন্ত জায়গায় গিয়েও শুনেছি যে ভারতবর্ষের যে একমাত্র ফিল্ম মেকারের কথা তারা জানে সেটা সত্যজিৎ রায়, যেটা খুব স্ট্রেঞ্জ আমার কাছে। এবং এত অসংখ্য ফিল্ম মেকার থাকা সত্ত্বেও তারা কিন্তু সত্যজিৎ রায়ের নামই বলেছিল আমাকে। তো এবার মজাটা হচ্ছে যে তিনি তার জীবদ্দশায় কিন্তু সবকটা কলকাতা শহরকে বা পশ্চিমবঙ্গকে বা বাংলা সংস্কৃতি বা কৃষ্টিকে, বাঙালি আনাকে তিনি একটা অন্য মাত্রা দিয়েছিলেন তার মাল্টিফেরিয়াস কাজের মাধ্যমে। হি ওয়াজ নট অনলি আ ফিল্ম মেকার, বাট আমরা সবাই জানি যে তার লিটারেচার, তার সাহিত্য, তার শিশু সাহিত্য, তার সন্দেশকে রিভাইভাল করা, তার নন্দনের লোগো তৈরি করা, ফিল্ম স্টাডিজ ডিপার্টমেন্টের আইডিয়া ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি, যে অসংখ্য ফিল্ম সোসাইটির নির্মাণ 1947 আপনারা ফিল্ম সোসাইটি করেছেন। তো এই সব কিছু মিলিয়ে মানে হি হ্যাজ কন্ট্রিবিউটেড ইন দ্য মেকিং অফ দ্য সিটি। ক্যালকাটা সিটি যেভাবে রিমেম্বার্ড, যেভাবে প্যান ইন্ডিয়াতে স্বীকৃত বা সারা বিশ্বে যদি এখন স্বীকৃতি থাকে, তাহলে সেইখানে দাঁড়িয়ে সত্যজিৎ রায় কিন্তু শহর তৈরিতেও একটা কন্ট্রিবিউশন আছে। মানে তিনি শহরকে কেবলমাত্র একটা এলিমেন্ট বা কমোডিটি হিসেবে ব্যবহার করেননি তার ছবিতে, এবং সেটা করা কিন্তু এই যে নিজের শহরের সাথে বিশ্ব ভুবনকে জুড়ে দেওয়া, এটা কিন্তু ইটস আ ভেরি ভেরি ডিফিকাল্ট বল গেম। এবং ফিল্ম মেকিং তার কাছে একটা সলিটারি জার্নি ছিল না, ইট ওয়াজ এ কমিউনিটেরিয়ান এন্টারপ্রাইজ। তো আমার মোটামুটি এটাই বলা। যদি কিছু ভিডিও দেখাতে পারতাম সুবিধা হতো, আশা করি আপনারা দেখবেন। এবার যদি আপনাদের কিছু জানার থাকে আমি বলতে পারি। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you, ma'am, for such a contributing lecture. আশা করি সবাই ভীষণ সমৃদ্ধ হয়েছে আপনার এই বক্তব্যে। এবার আমরা যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে কারোর, তাহলে আমরা সেইটা একটু দেখে নেব। If any of the candidates or participant wants to ask question, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
তাহলে আমিও অমৃত স্যারের মতোই বলছি, যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন পরে থাকে তাহলে আমাকে জিজ্ঞেস করলেই হবে। আমাকে তো ফোনেও পাওয়া যাবে, ফলে ফোন নাম্বার আমি দিয়ে দেবো, বা যদি মায়ের কাছে আছে।
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining with us today, and we will definitely provide all the questions that we get from our
হ্যাঁ,
participants.
দেবব্রত একটা প্রশ্ন করছে। দেবব্রত বলেছে যে সমস্ত ভিডিও লিঙ্কগুলোর মানে যে অংশগুলোর কথা আমি বলেছি ছবির, হ্যাঁ আমি ডেফিনেটলি পাঠিয়ে দেবো মেল করে, কারণ আমার কাছে ওই লিঙ্কগুলো করা আছে ট্রিমড ভার্সনে, কিন্তু মুশকিল হচ্ছে আমি গুগল মিটে ওটা প্রেজেন্ট করতে পারছিলাম না।
আচ্ছা ম্যাডাম, আমাকে দিয়ে দেবেন, আমি ওদের ফরওয়ার্ড করে দেব।
হ্যাঁ, পজিটিভ।
ওকে ম্যাম,
থ্যাংক ইউ।
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am.
হ্যাঁ, আশিস নন্দীর বইটার নাম, অনন্যাকে বলছি, সরি, আশিস নন্দীর বইটার নাম অ্যাম্বিগুয়াস জার্নি টু দ্য সিটি। ফলে এক সেকেন্ড, হ্যাঁ, অ্যাম্বিগুয়াস জার্নি টু দ্য সিটি, দ্য ভিলেজ অ্যান্ড দ্য অড রুইনস অফ দ্য সেলফ ইন দ্য ইন্ডিয়ান ইমাজিনেশন। এটা না ইন্ডিয়া অক্সফোর্ড ইউনিভার্সিটি প্রেস থেকে বেরিয়েছিল। বইটা না এরকম দেখতে, এই যে অ্যাম্বিগুয়াস জার্নি টু দ্য সিটি। থ্যাংক ইউ।
Okay, so I think we don't have any more questions. So thank you, ma'am.
না, পরে করলেও হবে, এবারে কবিতার কথা শুনবো।
আচ্ছা, এবার আমরা আমাদের পরের পার্টে চলে যাচ্ছি। I will request Abhay to take over the session and introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Aratrika. Am I being audible enough?
Yes.
You are.
Okay. Thank you, Aratrika, for giving me this opportunity to introduce our next resource person, Mr. Indranil Raichaudhuri. He is a renowned film director. We all know that. He has directed critically acclaimed films like Horing, Ekti Bangali Bhuter Golpo, City of Love, and Mayar Jonjal. He is also an alumnus of FTII, and he will be speaking on Postmaster, Tagore and Ray, and adaptation analysis. So, welcome to the webinar, sir, and over to you.
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here and inviting me here. Should I continue in English or should I shift? Because I'll have to, since I'm talking about Postmaster, at times I might have to read from the text. So it might be a little odd speaking in both the languages, sometimes shifting to Bangla and English. So what would be a good language to do this?
I think, sir, English will be better as we are being watched through YouTube as well, and there are, many audience members who do not understand Bengali.
Okay. I'll try my best to stick to English as much as possible,
Right.
but at times probably I might have to shift to Bangla. Okay.
Sure, sir.
Okay, so I'll try and make it as short as possible. This can be a little tedious comparing two parallel texts. The reason why I'm, when I was asked by you to, make a presentation for this seminar or a webinar rather, the reason I took up a text, a written text, and intended to compare it with a filmed version of it by Satyajit Ray is because one of the reasons why we are commemorating him 100 years of his birthday and all of that is happening. One of the reasons why we need to remember and remind ourselves of certain things that this person had done for us is to create a language for cinema in India that probably didn't exist before him. I mean, this probably is a very strong statement, but amongst other people, people, his contemporaries who were working with him or a little after him, probably the credit goes to him to kind of create a language for cinema in the Indian context, translate that language from a grammar that was being developed from somewhere else in the world, probably in the US and in the Europe at that point of time, and imagine an Indian equivalent of that, which is not a copy of what was being done in the West, but takes a lot of elements from that, and imagining what an Indian cinema, a truly original Indian cinema, could look like. The reason why we credit him with this achievement, amongst so many other things, if you remember, one of the things that I don't think even we need to remember it, I think we even do that now. We call cinema in Bangla, it's referred to as boi. One of the reasons why we do that is there was a huge, long tradition before Satyajit and even after that. Went on for a long time, it still exists, where the prime source of storytelling in cinema was derived from literature, which is why we called it a boi. But the format of filming that was borrowed probably from theater mostly. So what existed for a very long time, barring few exceptions here and there, I mean, this is not a black and white straight jacketed history, but barring exceptions, individual exceptions here and there, the broad format has always been of photographing theater, which was essentially a format that produced its own gems, of course, because of the skills of dialogue writing, the skills of the actors, sometimes the song, sometimes the spectacle that was created. So cinema is not exactly just one thing. It's so many combinations of so many things. But there was a huge gap there as to how would an Indian cinematic language look like. And this is what probably makes him so unique that even today, when we practice what we do, we'll have to go back to him several times to see how he has taken a text, just taking the material from that, be it Vibhuti Bhushan, be it Tara Shankar, be it whoever he has filmed, in this particular case, Rabindranath, taken the story and rendered it in a fashion which is completely original. But the language, a lot of elements that he is using are clearly borrowed from the West. But this borrowing somehow doesn't look like something that has been imposed from above. চাপিয়ে দেওয়া নয়, উপর থেকে নয়। এই ইন্টিগ্রেশনটা, this particular integration is something that probably changed the way we study cinema, we understand cinema, and eventually how we make cinema. The journey that started from Ray is now on, and the forms that it's taking are manifold, right? But the primer probably was created by him. So we examine. The reason why I've taken Postmaster is not because it's the best example of Ray's translation of a text into screen, but because we have a certain limited time, and it's best to do this in the form, in a slightly shorter format, which is a short story. So, Postmaster. If I'm not wrong, Postmaster was written in 1891. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. When Tagore was 30 years old, probably living in Shilaidaho at that point of time. And one must also understand that the short story in 1891 was something that was new even in Indian literature, definitely in Bangla literature and also in Indian literature. It was a format that has again been borrowed from the West. And again, like Satyajit was inventing a language of film from the beginning of his career, this is also an example of somebody taking a format, a literary format from abroad, and trying to and trying to create stuff from realities that were happening somewhere else in the world, right? এটা রবীন্দ্রনাথের একদম শুরুর দিকে লেখা সম্ভবত as a short story. It has that mark of grappling with a new medium. It's definitely not his most skilled short story that he has written, and you can clearly see that he himself is trying to figure out how to create and construct a narrative in 5 pages. Those marks of those struggles are there in that story. So let's just examine, take that story and see how he goes about it. I'll just read probably a page from that story. It's a 5-page story, doesn't take long, which probably will give you an idea of the first act of Satyajit Ray's adaptation of that. Let's compare as to how Tagore went about describing what he wanted to describe, and let's see how Satyajit Ray takes the same element and achieves that through a completely roundabout way, but keeping the essential ingredients of those narratives intact, but does it in a completely different way for reasons that we are going to examine once we go into a comparative analysis. So let's just take up the first part of Tagore's story and just read a little bit of that. I don't know whether you can see that, but it's not important. I'll just read a little bit and see. So he starts off by saying, প্রথম কাজ আরম্ভ করিয়াই উলাপুর গ্রামে পোস্টমাস্টারকে আসিতে হয়। গ্রামটি অতি সামান্য, নিকটে একটি নীলকুঠি আছে, তাই কুঠির সাহেব অনেক জোগাড় করিয়া এই নতুন পোস্ট অফিস স্থাপন করাইয়াছে। আমাদের পোস্টমাস্টার কলকাতার ছেলে, জলের মাছকে ডাঙায় তুলিলে যেরকম হয়, এই গণ্ডগ্রামের মধ্যে আসিয়া পোস্টমাস্টারের সেই দশা উপস্থিত হইয়াছে। একখানি অন্ধকার আটচালার মধ্যে তাহার অফিস, অদূরে একটি পানাপুকুর এবং তাহার চারিপাড়ে জঙ্গল। কুঠির গোমস্তা প্রভৃতি যে সকল কর্মচারী আছে, তাহাদের ফুরসত প্রায় নাই এবং তাহার ভদ্রলোকের সহিত মিশিবার উপযুক্ত নহে। বিশেষত কলিকাতার ছেলে ভালো করিয়া মিশিতে জানে না। অপরিচিত স্থানে গেলে হয় উদ্ধত নয় অপ্রতিভ হইয়া থাকে। সে সেই কারণে স্থানীয় লোকের সহিত তার মেলামেশা হইয়া ওঠে না। অথচ হাতে কাজ অধিক নাই। কখনো কখনো দু একটা কবিতা লিখিতে চেষ্টা করেন, তাহাতে এমন ভাব ব্যক্ত করিয়াছেন যে সমস্ত দিন তরুপল্লবের কম্পন এবং আকাশের মেঘ দেখিয়া জীবন বড় সুখে কাটিয়া যায়। কিন্তু অন্তর্যামী জানেন, যদি আরব্য উপন্যাসের কোনো দৈত্য আসিয়া এক রাত্রের মধ্যে এই শাখাপল্লব সমেত সমস্ত গাছগুলি কাটিয়া পাকা রাস্তা বানাইয়া দেয় এবং সারি সারি অট্টালিকা আকাশের মেঘকে দৃষ্টিপথ হইতে রুদ্ধ করিয়া রাখে, তাহা হইলে এই আধমরা ভদ্র সন্তানটি পুনশ্চ নবজীবন লাভ করিতে পারে। পোস্টমাস্টারের বেতন অতি সামান্য, নিজের আধিয়া খাইতে হয় এবং গ্রামের একটি পিতৃমাতৃহীন অনাথা বালিকা তাহার কাজকর্ম করিয়া দেয়, চারিটি চারিটি খাইতে পায়। মেয়েটির নাম রতন, বয়স 12-13, বিবাহের বিশেষ সম্ভাবনা দেখা যায় না। আমি এখানে থামছি, আই এম স্টপিং হিয়ার, আই এম গোয়িং ব্যাক। If you just broadly go, see what Tagore does in the first one page, he's basically laying out the premises of the story. He tells you who this person is. He tells how that he gives a lot of information. This is an information section of the story. So what are the informations that are communicated? That there is a postmaster goes to a gram called Ulapur. He gives this extra detail that in Ulapur there is this Nilkuthi, and there is a new post office that has been established. But the people who work there are not exactly the kind of people this city-bred guy would like to interact with. Well, he likes the villages to the extent that he sometimes sits there, looks at the trees, hears the crickets. He has this habit of writing poetry. So sometimes a few of his poems do, express his enchantment with whatever he sees. But given a chance, every living moment of his life, he desires this to be a different place. He's here because he has a job and he has to be here, and he's not happy about that. And there is this girl called Ratan, who's 12-13, who's onath, doesn't have parents, who lives here with the postmaster, with any postmaster that comes by, and helps them out with their daily chores. In return, she gets to eat. All of this, if you understand, have been narrated by the author as form of information in a linear fashion, one after the other. You first get to know who the postmaster is. Secondly, you get to know what his state of mind is. Third, you get to know the fact that he is here, but he is here by compulsion, not because he sometimes pretends to be happy here, but it's not something that he really he would have loved to be in a place in the cities. And that his only companion as of now in the story, and in fact in the whole story there are no other characters actually. The book doesn't mention any other characters. Is a girl called Ratan, who's 12 or 13 years old, who lives here and who works for him, or any other postmaster that comes and works here. Now these are all informations that he's kind of piled up one after the other to tell you what the story is going to be about. It's a setting of the story. Very soon, as the story progresses in a linear fashion, this is the very, as I said, the marks of somebody grappling, understanding, and refashioning a new medium is extremely evident in also the way, because he's 30 years old, he's just started writing short stories. He himself is also figuring out. And it's a linear fashion of storytelling where one information comes chronologically after the other. Now, when we go to Satyajit Ray's film, this linearity is there. It's not that it's something that Satyajit Ray gets rid of. He also, narrates the story in a linear fashion. But there are several kinds of linearity, which is what differentiates the story from the film. First is that, yes, you can tell the story linearly and, chronologically, event B can follow event A and event C can follow event B. That's how normally we tell stories. That's the traditional form of storytelling. But there is another form of linearity, which is when I introduce a character or when I introduce an event in a linear storytelling fashion, I tend to tell you everything about it. So when Ratan is introduced in the story, you hear everything that you need to know about Ratan physically, that she's 12, 13 years old. And then you get to hear that she works here. And then very soon, in the next probably paragraph, there is an imagined conversation, not exactly in the form of a dialogue that Tagore resorts to, where the postmaster asks her about her family. And Ratan says that she doesn't have parents. Then the postmaster says, in fact, the postmaster asks that, don't you remember your mother? And she says, I don't. In fact, and then the author goes on to say, in fact, she remembers her father more because the father loved her more. And then she remembers her brother with whom she used to play. And out of all those things that they have had together, long back by the standards of a 12, 13-year-old girl's life, the only thing that really stays in the mind of this girl is the fact that they had taken a little branch of a tree and had pretended fishing, right? So this is another kind of linearity where whenever you introduce an event, whenever you introduce a character, you start giving the information around that from the narrator's point of view. What Satyajit Ray primarily does is, and this is where the differentiation of the language of cinema and the language of literature happens. Not that you can't do that in literature. In fact, I think Tagore did that several times in his own writing later on. But again, as I referred to, this is one of his early short story experiments. So whenever something happens, the details around that are enumerated, and then you go to the next step, and then you go to the next step. This is the first thing that Satyajit Ray probably does away with. The reason being, and this is where the fun and excitement of watching a film comes, is that when you introduce a character, when you introduce a situation, you of course, through its physicality, through certain information, dialogues, you introduce certain things that help you understand, things happening around it. But you necessarily don't divulge all the information. Like when Ratan comes, something completely different happens. And the first time we get to know about the essentials of Ratan is much later. And through an event that reveals Ratan in a much better way, or a much more, let's say, denser way, than if we would have just said, used just dialogues in the very beginning to say who this person is. So let's just compare this with the first act, and it's very interesting that this 40-minute short film, maybe a little less than that, probably 37-38-minute short film, follows certain basic formats that have been borrowed from the dramatic analytic narrative style, which was at that point of time extremely prevalent in Hollywood and also in Europe. The three-act structure, which was being practiced in cinema writing, it's there clearly in Postmaster. He uses that, but never for a second do you feel that you're watching a film that on which something extremely alien has been transported. So this, I don't want to use the word Indianization, but the way this has been integrated into a story that doesn't follow the structure at all is something which is quite interesting. So let's just see the first part of Postmaster, and as we go about, let's see how Satyajit Ray. I hope you can see the screen, right? No, you can't. Just a sec. Just a sec. Okay, can you see the screen? Can somebody just tell me whether you can see the screen or not?
Yes, sir.
You can. Thank you. So let's just see the first part of Postmaster, and as we run through, probably at times I'll just stop, or along with the story, I might just keep commenting a little, because otherwise it'll get too long. So just run through this and see how the initial information, the same information which Tagore has given by saying that this is how the guy thinks, or by saying this is what the guy asks the girl, and as she answers, this is what the girl thinks. This is how Tagore goes about describing various setups that construct this story. Let's examine how the same is achieved in a completely roundabout manner in the film. I'll just forward this a little. This is very simple. You start off with a post office signal and you know what it is.
আমি তো সঙ্গে লোক না পল্লিগ্রামের থেকে কিন্তু কখনো কখনো না ও দেখবেন 2-4 দিন থাকতে থাকতে তো পরিচয় হয়ে যায় তবে হ্যাঁ এইদিকে অবহেলা করবেন না ব্যোমকেশের বই আপনার দেখছেন না খেলি এই অবস্থা ভারী শয়তান নেই আপনার তো নতুন মাস্টারটাকে দেখেছি ওর গায়ে কত জোর জানি যদি দেখি খ্যাতামো করেছো তোমার চুলের টুটি ধরে ট্যাম দোলা করে সেই চরম টাকার মা হ্যাঁ
Okay, so this is, let's say, the first part of the first act, just the introduction of the first act. And I'm sorry about the print. I couldn't get hold of anything better than this. This is probably the best version of Postmaster that exists on the torrent circuit. I'm sorry about that, but I tried my best. This is the best we have, so we have to make do with what I have right now. So this is the first part of the first act. So what do you see? You see the fact that this is the post office. That is done extremely directly. No, roundabout. Not going roundabout about it. It's like straight. You say it's a post office, and you see a guy leaving. This is not there in Tagore's story, but he is required for two things. Why? A, he tells you what Tagore describes. That this guy is from the city. Can't be done in film except through a monologue. So somebody needs to come and say to him that, is this your first time or you live in the cities? So it's going to be tough for you. So you immediately understand that this guy has come from the city, and this is one very important information about the character that you need. But this is information. This is still information. And then Ratan comes in. In Tagore, when Ratan comes in, the first information that is said about Ratan is that she's an orphan and she's 12-13 years old. There is not much chance of her marriage, stuff like that. But when Ratan comes in, there are 2 to 3 things that are happening side by side. Once he's introduced this character, Satyajit Ray will just not probably use him for information only, this postmaster who's leaving. So he uses him for something that we will need in the story, which is Ratan's growing affinity for the new postmaster. So how does he do that? You don't need to explain, you need to go too deep into that, but it's clearly hinted that the way this postmaster is treating this girl will strike us as extremely different from the way our postmaster, our protagonist, is going to treat this girl. So in a film, when Tagore says that Ratan gets very attached to the postmaster, that's something a writer can write, and in a piece of literature, we have absolutely no problem of accepting that. but to understand why in a film, why a character behaves in a certain fashion, why the bond between Ratan and Postmaster is going to be extremely valuable for the end that he is trying to achieve, now has a little bit of a background for us to connect with, which is there is a distinct difference between this fellow and the one that follows him. And then Ratan takes his luggage and goes away, and the postmaster has nothing much to do. So let's go to the part after that. So it is a clear, he's using musical elements here, something that he would have probably not done in the later part of his career. But it's a clear sign that there's a certain drudgery to the music, and what Tagore describes, that he has nothing much to do and there is so much of spare time and it's such a non-happening place, is something that now Ray is trying to achieve. So one, of course, he uses music. The second is the way this fellow moves about in this room. He's bored, clearly, and he's wondering what to do. It's clearly a character who is not very happy coming here, doesn't have anything in his body language, which shows us that he's extremely happy being where he is. Okay, this is the first thing he takes out. Now, when assuming a 23, 24-year-old guy, the first thing that comes out of his suitcase is a family photograph of himself, his sister, his younger brother, and his mother. This is something that we'll come to know later. Tells you, it's an information, of course, that he's taking out a photograph, doesn't strike us as strange, but it's not just an information. Of course, it tells you a little bit about his family, but it tells you about the character. And it tells you that he's missing his home. He's not happy being away from his family. This is something that Tagore, within the fourth paragraph of the story, starts describing, talking about the time that he's sitting there, looking at the the murmuring of the leaves, the silence of the groves around him, and the spatter of the rain. He misses his mother. This is what Tagore describes. It's the same thing in an extremely short fashion is achieved by Satyajit Ray by making him take out the photograph first. Normally you may not take out, carry a photograph of your family with you unless and until you are really attached to it. The reason why he does that is something that will become important for us towards the end of the story. To understand whatever he's doing, he's building up towards the end. We all know the story, we all know the end. So the premises for the end are being set up from the very first parts of the first act itself, which is introducing the character, introducing the setup, exposing the various relationships of the protagonists is what he's doing. So starts off with the photograph. Okay. So this is another one. I mean, these are sentences in Tagore's stories. Tahar kobita lekhar kinchit obhyas chilo. So the second thing that he brings out is a notebook, exercise book, over which he has written kobita, which tells you the second thing about the character now. Third is a novel, and there are several books that he's taking out. So this tells you, this clearly see, this is in literature, when you describe this character, you would, and Tagore does that very clearly, that he was missing his home. He's a guy who has a habit of writing poetry, but what is being done here is there is a clear case of preference being given. Now this character could have come out and, like a very normal guy, could have first taken out his towel and his clothes. The reason why he gets out this photograph and then his exercise book and then 5-6 books one after the other tells you that you are going to expect certain things from him in a certain way. It builds him up. If he had taken out his clothes first, which is a very normal human thing to do, it would have been probably a different signaling of the character. Okay, this is another extremely apparently insignificant but an extremely important thing. There's a key lying on the bed, and suddenly this guy remembers that it's not a great thing to do. So he rushes back. This is the first time we see him actually a little focused. He rushes back, he takes the keys and puts it in his pocket of a piece of whatever kurta which is hanging there. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you clearly that this guy is in an alien atmosphere and he is not trusting his surroundings. So again, this is information, but subtly hidden information which looks like apparent events unfolding in front of us, but information that are building character. So you have got several things. He misses his family. He's a guy who has a habit of writing poetry. He loves to read, or at least pretends that he loves to read. That's what we have got so far. And then he suddenly realizes that it's not very safe to keep the keys on a bed unguarded, because he is not very confident about the surroundings that he is, which means he's feeling alienated. He's feeling new here.
কি দেখছিস না করে?
Okay, again, it's an extension of what we have just started. Now we have introduced the character. Now we are introducing what he's supposed to expect in this village. Now this is almost a literary metaphor, but it doesn't look like a literary metaphor because it's hidden as comedy. You sit on a chair and the chair breaks down, so you are the event is so strong and sudden and funny that's what you are concentrating on, but what he's hiding behind this apparently funny thing is that this is exactly how his life is going to look like in the coming days. And immediately he uses that as the first point of interaction between the postmaster, between the two protagonists of the film. And what is the kind of interaction? Is that he's embarrassed that it has happened to him. So he's a city-bred guy. He doesn't like being caught in a situation like that. And the moment he is embarrassed, like a city-bred guy, he would choose to be unpleasant, because he clearly knows the hierarchy that exists between him and the other. So it establishes the connect, establishes their relationship, and creates a fantastic contrast that Satyajit Ray will be building on or twisting and turning while the story moves ahead. See, the moment you are caught in an embarrassing position, you hide it up, or you make it up for by commanding your servant to re-establish. The moment you fall from the chair, you don't look like a master. And the natural reaction of the girl could have been that she was smiling, but she didn't, because she is also apprehensive of how her new master would be. And this new master handles this situation by commanding her to clean the room. So this again tells you something about the character. It's a very urban thing to do, and it's a very feudal thing to do at the same time. And a clear hierarchy is established, which will be the foundation of their relationship, the transcending of that hierarchy, and then the reversal that will happen is based on this initial dynamic that he's creating right now. He continues with the same mode now. It's the same master mode that he is in at this point of time. Okay, now he does something which is again a continuation of that distrust that was established before. So you're taking up a link and you're extending it now. What you do is you're seeing the same distrust with the key, and now it is extended with something else. Now these are very what should I say, almost unnoticeable little things that he's building up, but do understand not a single thing is happening without purpose here. So he takes his purse, puts it in the suitcase or trunk or whatever, and then he leaves. Okay, now he goes to take a bath now. Now this is something that is not there in the story, except when in the last scene of Tagore's story, Rabindranath very casually mentions that Shokal Bela Uthiya dekhilen je tahar snaner jol dhora ache ebong postmaster. In fact, in Tagore's story, he doesn't have a name. In this story, we still don't see him having a name, but he'll soon have a name, because you can't have a character without a name in a format like this. So Tagore mentions him, mentions casually that he's a city-bred guy and he doesn't like, taking a shower or bathing in the river or in the pond. Satyajit Ray does this in the beginning of the film. Simply because it gives him an opportunity to extend the fact that he has been starting to weave, which is the urban-rural discomfort. And he does that because there's no point in referring to this bit of information in the end of the film, because he's building up to that end. So he uses this and he doubles it up with a sign that he will be using much later. Look at the way he walks through the forest. This is a very different walk that Ratan from what Ratan has. He's extremely uneasy, and now he stops and sees something. It's the skin of a snake. Also, to understand the way he uses it, I mean, even in a literary sense, if you see a snake passing, it would have been a very direct metaphor. So also this hiding up messages, hinting it through elements which are not so direct, is also part of this new language building that Satyajit Ray is attempting to do here. Okay, so you don't need to actually show a snake. In a theatrical structure, you would actually see a snake probably with some music there. All you see here is a dead snake's skin, and that's enough. And that's where he cuts. And he comes and says that তুই জল তুলে দে আমি ওখানে নাইতে পারবো না. See, so far we are busy with the postmaster. So this is the first time we actually seriously notice Ratan. So two things that we get to know about her: she is brushing her master's shoes even without being told, which means that probably she has been trained to do that before. So it tells you something about the character, that she is master fearing or maybe obedient. And while she does that, this photograph draws her attention. This is the same single line in Tagore's story saying she was Onath, but we don't know that as yet in the story. So you're building up on that. You're instead of just saying, creating a scene in a film where the postmaster could have asked her exactly as he does in the story, do you remember your mother? You don't do that because it's a very direct way of going about it. So again, it's exactly like the skin of the snake. You go about the same thing in a manner which is not noticeable directly. This is a very famous sequence. Everybody remembers this sequence in Postmaster. I think it's probably the most memorable part, because of Nirupata Chattopadhyay's performance. Everybody remembers it, but this is not there in the story. The purpose of it is, of course, very obvious. We have been building on this urban-rural discomfort. Now it is kind of blown up into a proportion which is terrifying and comic at the same time, but is extended, but it just doesn't happen on its own. For example, this scene is inordinately long compared to the other details that Satyajit Ray spends time upon, probably because of the sheer acting brilliance of Bishe Pagla. And the the visually arresting, because you never get bored for a second when he's on screen. He's so good. So probably it is extended, but he doesn't let this just remain an extension of the theme and variations that he's doing at this point of time. He's using this to establish the first bond of trust between Ratan and the postmaster. We have seen one interaction where there was clearly a master-servant exchange. Now the master-servant exchange goes to the step 2, which is the first beginning point of dependence.
Ratan. Okay. ওকে কি বলবি না বাবু? ও বুঝে পারবে না। আমি যাই?
scene is fairly extended for a long time and way beyond the economy of the other scenes. And this is probably where Ray gives in, and probably rightly so, to the just sheer visual brilliance of the actors. Uncharacteristically long for a Ray build-up. And he does, use say the same thing through a certain amount of comedy that probably doesn't look out of place here. So you turn the book around. Look at this. This is also in this he's packing up other details. Now packing up details underneath, like the first word she says is Babur gaye koto jor janish. Now this is the only information about Babu that she has collected so far, because that's the only information that has been given to her by the previous postmaster. So this is all she knows, but she uses it in a different context. This becomes the foundation of the relationship that will start now. And the madman Bishepagla is introduced, yes, but he will be not left alone just like that. He will be used at several points of time in the film, including the end, in a completely contrasting manner. So probably helps by extending the scene, because he is there in the last scene in a fashion which is unmistakable, in a way that's unmistakably noticeable.
Yeah, right. Left, 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 left.
Okay, this is functional. He is writing to his mom, and this will now bring us into the second phase of the relationship, which is the information that Tagore gives in the beginning of the film, of his story. So this is what I call about non-linearity within a linear structure, that you're passing on information about characters and revealing things about characters in a fashion that is not linear, which is one of the primary strengths of telling a story in cinema. Because it's a point that it's how you connect it, and the point that you introduce is what makes the information meaningful. So she asks him whether he has finished writing. This is also an information that will be helpful later on. Okay, first time after that little, now you can clearly understand that the master and the slave equation is gradually beginning to shift because he's noticing that she wears dirty clothes. This is how you know about her now. So what I'm seeing now is being developed from what I have seen already. I have established that previous postmaster, I have established hinted at the interaction between them. Now comes the information which I can connect with it, and the shift in their dynamic, in their relationship dynamic is now looking organic to me because it has happened because of some reason, because of the Bishu Pagla incident, and then the fact that she notices that letter, and then you have the information that she can't read and write, and then she talks about her family, which leads him to behave the way he does and treat him the way he does, treat her the way he does right now. So you are reinforcing the rural-urban theme in a different context. Now from being comical, it becomes a little, at least serious for the protagonist. Something that we will later on use towards the end. So it takes, again, these are reinforcement of the theme. So this is how one thing is constantly used, taken and brought back to reinforce things that we have already started building. So Bishe Pagla doesn't go waste, and he'll be used several times. Uses the same sound mnemonics, so it's easier for us to understand. And this is almost bordering on the serio comic, probably. So a guy who sleeps with a razor underneath his pillow because he hears a madman is going to behave in a certain way. So this is okay. Now I'll stop and I'll just stop for a second and go back and ask you as to how, is this too boring or too extended? I can speed it up. Because
no, sir, it's engaging and exciting actually.
Yeah, please go on.
Because I'm going almost scene by scene, so if people are getting bored, then one can speed
It's
it
a
up.
wonderful deliberation, sir. It's a wonderful deliberation.
Okay. So this is where the first act ends, and the first act, as we all know, is the act of exposition, where You're just establishing the primary elements of the story, where you have the protagonist. You know the basic things about the protagonist now. You've seen a certain build up to their relationship, something that we will be using later on. And you have also established the premises on which the conflicts will be built later on. Even there are minor conflicts; they're not huge, earth-shaking conflicts, but nevertheless, there are conflicts that we are going to use very soon. So now you have the second act, which is the introduction of the ambience and then building up on that. And notice how he stamps the letters, the envelopes. In literature, this is mentioned as প্রথমবার চাকরি পাইয়াই উনি উলাপুরে আসিলেন. And what is the visual equivalent of that is the way Satyajit Ray uses three little flourishes of stamping over a chronological time gap, and you clearly see that it's the first time, and then it slowly becomes different as the story goes along. So let's just start from the second act now. So he's stamping in a certain manner. You can obviously see that it is taking him a lot of time. He's in Tagore's story, there are no visitors, but there are mentions of them. And in a different context. Of course, the time also has changed. I think Tagore's story is based in 1891. He mentions the Nilkuthi, he mentions the Gobostas of Nilkuthi, and he says that the postmaster, they are not people the postmaster would really like to talk to. This is probably a little before independence, I would assume. He never mentions the time. There is no specific indication of what the time is, unless and until we have a close-up of the calendar, which he doesn't show us. But you clearly, it's the same extension of the theme in a different format, where you have nice, kind villagers, but about whom he is just not interested. And now in this, that's another extension of the story, where you get to know that he is not interested. There is nobody in the surroundings that would interest him as friends or companions. So it will build up on his loneliness, but also a little nice touch on how the city person changes completely when he sees a bunch of cowering, slightly obsequious, sorry for their existence, old village folk. Look at the way he talks. It's a very different tone. We have not seen him talk like this. So it is an additional layer of information about the character that is now added, which is that he is also a little bit of a snob, if he gets a chance to be. So you know what these people are. The maximum they have gone to is Rana Ghat. So he doesn't even look at them while talking most of the times.
কষ্টকর অবশ্যই আমার একটু কবিতা টবিতা লেখার বাতি আছে, তাই নিরিবিলিটা তো খারাপ লাগে না.
So the information that comes from Tagore's story about him writing poetry, which we have seen a little bit through that exercise book, now is used as a way of exposing a character in a different light, a certain amount of coldness in his character, which will also help us in the end, because if this coldness was not required, probably they would not have gone in this direction. He goes there a little distance and comes back.
আপনার গান বাজনার সাথে রাতে কি আমার বোন গান শিখছে, আমি অবশ্যই অনেক ভালো ভালো গান শুনেছি কলকাতায় তো আর তাদের আমার নেই
He doesn't look at them. It's very important, and he's dismissive, and he's making them feel every second that he's not part of their world. Now, this is something very interesting because you will see a complete different attitude that he has with them towards the end of the story.
কে গান করেন আমাদের সঙ্গে করেন আমারই বাড়িতে সন্ধ্যের সময় একটু গানের চর্চা হয় ও সন্ধ্যেটা আমি একটু ইংরেজি চর্চা করি এই স্কটের একটা উপন্যাস ধরেছি দেখি
So he's reading a Scott novel, and he doesn't have enough time to go and visit these people. So it's story and also character at the same time. So now he's relaxed. He's having his soft mori, and he will now read his mom's letter in leisure. So it's the first time you hear his name, Baba Nando. Now, Nando is not a name that Tagore gave. That Tagore has always referred to him as postmaster. But Satyajit Ray needs a name because this character would be addressed as somebody eventually. And do notice that he uses the name to some other fun also later on. You know, it's also something that he doesn't just bring in and let go. He uses the name in a different way. Right now, this letter gives us an opportunity to go into a completely different direction. Because she has noticed that he's reading something and will enter soon. Because she's very curious. She has seen the photograph, so it's a clear sign of her being drawn to this character because he's distinctly different from what she has experienced so far. And he jumps the line and asks the questions. Ki porcho? Card chithi, she says. So now you're getting into a different level of this character interactions. The levels have changed now. See, the moment this means now the story has moved into Act 2 clearly, because she has now clearly developed an investment in this man. The moment there is a mention of a sister, her smile changes. And because she knows that she has competition, so it's very strange that Tagore mentions a brother in his story. Ray doesn't mention any brother in Ratan's past, but uses that element into developing something else here. You know, so it's an element that's been taken from there, not used where it was used in the written story, but he uses it in a very different context here. So the mention of Rani changes her face. That's the first thing that she'll notice, of course, because this is what her identity is. She can't read and write. Okay, I'll now this is very interesting as to what you do in cinema. I mean, this song is required because it tells you so much about the way she sings, the body language, the way she sings the song. It's almost like an offering of being accepted. You know, she's applying to be accepted. She's applying for a relationship that she has never had. She's saying, accept me as your sister because I can sing too. And he's turning around and he's making the best of effort. So it's required. it's a fantastic narrative element. But the problem in cinema with a song like this is that it goes on, and then what do you do with time? So Ray does what he's a very intelligent fellow. So this is what he does. So how do you manage a song that goes on? You need it, but you can't have it entirely. But it's not a record that you can stop. So use script, you use dialogue, and it's also a character that builds up through it. So now it's already started dragging because the purpose of that song is over in the narrative. He needs to wrap it up. See, that's what he does. She has to say Arjanina to now get into the next zone. Okay. It's a completely different shift in their relationship. He's accepted her now. She has made the application. He has accepted her because of the song. He's offered her his active participation in her life. And look what he does, which he did in the first act. He's hid his purse and locked it up while he went for a shower. And this is what he does now. Tells her exactly where the purse is kept. Yeah. So two things are happening. The story is progressing and the characters are progressing together, which is what is probably a little absent in Tagore's story, is that you have the characters in the beginning as characters and you describe who they are, you describe their mental states, and then you go about, once you have established the premise of the story and the characters, you go about the events. And while you have the events, you talk about the reactions within the mind of the character. But the unique experience of cinema is that the character plots the action, the narrative, and the narrative reflects back on the character. And it's a constant seesaw that happens, which is the propellant of any engaging narrative. It's something clearly borrowed from Hollywood, from Europe. There is no question about the fact that Indian narratives epical narratives don't move like that. They don't move in this cause and effect relationship. But he's taken those causal elements, this cause and effect structure, but you don't feel you're watching a European film for a second because he's hidden it up so well.
And at the place, I tell you, বাকিটা তো বকশিস ভালো করে লেখাপড়া শেখ আরো বকশিস পায়
Okay, so this is where the second act gets into a montage now, where you will clearly see the passage of time. But do notice that he gives her a bakshish. Now, this bakshish is a very, I mean, it looks like it's very natural that she'll give her a bakshish. It's not there in Tagore's story, but Satyajit Ray is presupposing the end, where the whole climax of the story is dependent on giving money, and her reaction to that is what forms the final climactic moment of the story. So this doesn't happen by chance. I mean, he's deliberately putting it here because you see that in a moment where she's accepted, she's feeling that she's part of his life, she happily accepts that bakshish. She has no problem accepting it as her own, but she'll do something completely different. So that will then color that refusal so very well, because she is not by per se unwilling to accept money. In Tagore, the money thing happens only once, but because that's where the story ends, he is referring to it silently in the beginning. Okay, this is the phase 2 of the stamping. You can clearly see there's a difference, and you will see it once more. So this is clearly an indication of time passing. She is reading, and comes the rupee. Now look at this. This is how he takes something from a story and does a completely different turn out of that. In Rabindranath, it's mentioned that Dater Bela chatti ruti koriya anito. That's all it's mentioned, and they would have that and go to bed. That's what Tagore says. Satyajit Ray uses it in a completely different manner. The ruti is there, but the ruti is so unlike a real ruti, and so you have the information, but the fact that she's a child, despite all of that, is he doesn't let a chance to reveal that. So it's a secret way of recycling a theme without you noticing it. Now it's the third time of stamping, and no, I think it will happen a little later. So she's clearly gone, and so you really know time has passed. So this is you don't need to show clocks, you don't need to show calendars, you don't need to use a title card. Just the way he stamps the envelope tells you what time has passed. Now you come to a section which is very important, which is different from Tagore's story, and this is the first clear divergence he makes very soon.
But very good. Now
this is very interesting. In Tagore's story, Tagore says that very soon she crossed the Juktakkar phase. And Satyajit Ray definitely, not unconsciously, stops it here and says Juktakkar is yet not done. And then he stops here because he can't let go of a little bit of fun here, which is also part of his sense of humor, is something that guides his storytelling. So now he uses the name Nando, and so which is why it could not have been any other name. He uses this little the misspelling of Nando by Ratan, which looks like makes it look like Nonod, which is why he has chosen this name. So even the choosing of that name Nando and attaching the Juktakkar incident without it is pre-planned. It is not something that happened by chance.
Degi. Pencil sir. Okay.
So the Juktakkar phase now starts, where he's about to teach her Juktakkar, and this is the transition point from chapter 2 to act 2 to act 3. This is where the real crisis now starts building up, because so far there are two things you have done. The exposition has told us about the character, the setting, the various contradictions, the conflicts. Then you have developed on those conflicts a little bit. You have developed on the relationship. You've clearly seen that the relationship has gone to level that was not existent in Act 1, and now you have come to Act 3, where the problem is going to unfold and create what we will have. So we're going to actually, is it getting too long? We are almost over time, right? So, or we stop here?
Sir, you can continue.
I
Sir, you
can,
can continue.
if it's boring, then we can just.
No, sir. Actually, it's quite interesting, sir, the way you were explaining things. And since you are the last speaker, you don't need to worry about the time, actually.
So I'll take another 10 minutes. Can I have a 1 minute break? Just like a water break? Huh? I'll just get some water for me. Just a break, just a 1 minute break.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, just give me a second.
If you have any question, you can put your question in the chat box, please. And also, you're requested to fill up the feedback form. Kindly fill up the feedback form. And if you have any query, kindly put your query in the chat box.
Okay, we are in the third act now, and let's jump into it straight away. It's a beginning of, it's not exactly the third act, it's that point where you transition into the third act actually. So I can fast forward this song a little bit to come to a point where he's just looking at them. So the song goes on, and apart from the absolute, the song almost becomes a representative of what this whole rural village life for him is in the evenings. And then you look at him and you know things are not right for him. So in Rabindranath, this is, Rabindranath just says that one morning as it was raining, Ratan goes into his room and realizes that he's sleeping. Then she's going out, and then he says Ratan, and she realizes that he's unwell. But this is, in cinema, you can't do that actually. So he's leading you on to that illness, which will now be the center of our story. So I will just forward this part a little, because this will, and it's night, and she hears something falling in the room, and she goes in, and you have them. So this is clearly story, but do understand, to remember this, that you have seen this in the first scene itself, and it is clearly there. There is a poster there. And they even make fun and say that this is like the land of malaria. So you've hinted that, and now you're catching up with that hint. So you've clearly now moved into the third act, where he's ill, and they are asking him to take a tablet. And then you have Ratan clearly now gone into the role of a mother almost, where and very soon now, in the rain, in the thunder, she takes on a shape which is unclear to him now. Could be the mother, could be something. So, like almost literally, she moves into a different zone for him in the delirium. So it's a this delirium is not there in Tagore's story as there because but he uses this specifically because this is going to do several things in the story, help him, probably help us realize how severe it is. And this bit, like she goes and gets her blanket and puts it onto him, is not there in the story, but it clearly tells you that Ratan is now totally invested with the postmaster. Ratan, this is the life that she is living. And he is in a state of delirium. So you have this little sequence where he slowly starts. Again, you get back Bishupagla. So the third time you get Bishupagla again. And okay, so that part is now over and he is clearly recovered. But this is where the third act's first clear hint of a transition is known only to the audience, but not to Ratan. Like he's asking for a transfer. So that information has been conveyed. Now, very strangely, in the story, the transfer is not is communicated by Rabindranath by saying that he just says that he asks for a transfer and he waits for the answer. But here, this is used as a premonition of what is going to happen, because we see this scene in the light of this application now, because a lot of exchanges are going to happen. Tells you about what has happened in the meanwhile, tells you about his dependence on her, and this is almost like a cruel jab, because now you have seen he's working towards the end now clearly, because you have seen that that application, and after writing this application, it is almost an insensitive, cruel jab that Ray makes him deliver. Now, this piece of poem is not there in Rabindranath's story. Ray uses this little bit of information that he is a novice poet to write this little drivel that he has written. It's a very bad piece of poetry, which Ray deliberately uses because to show that the fact that this is something that he practices, but uses it in a context which is almost cruel, infinitely cruel. Now, this Juktakhar, which was completed in Tagore's story, is deliberately always incomplete in the Shotoitra's story, because that is probably, that incompleteness is what he is probably trying to achieve. You have the jab and you have the question back, and now he asks this most cruel question that he can ask. Being this is just urban stupidity. Of course, she likes working with him because it's a different life for him now. Her now. So this is a point where Ray is clearly abandoning the postmaster in a certain way, that the focus now increasingly moves towards Ratan for reasons that we will see later, because this is the point where the master-slave relationship probably starts getting altered. Very subtly, very, very, very subtly. He acts like a fool, increasingly being insensitive, asks questions which are deliberately meaninglessly hurting, gives her this piece of poetry, and now also fusses over eating quinine. Now, this little scene is not again a little piece of comedy, because it tells you how silly and foppish finally this guy is. So again, he goes to himself. It's the self-image that changes the tone of the scene, and he decides that little bit of vacillation is gone. But it's cruel because she doesn't believe it. Okay, now you've come to the last part of the movie. He has written an application, and this little scene has happened. In Tagore's story, the postmaster tells the girl, Ratan, that he is leaving tomorrow morning. It's something that Satyajit Ray deliberately avoids, because as I told you, that he's increasingly abandoning his protagonist as somebody who's cruel and who doesn't even bother to explain this to Ratan. So this is something that is revealed in a very different way from the way Tagore does. It's just a casual piece of information, as if on which Ratan's life depends, and she just overhears it. So this is the new postmaster coming, and this is when Ratan overhears what is now going to happen to her. So this is completely unknown to her, that her life is changing. This scene, if it was done between the postmaster and the girl, as it is done in the story, and the way it's done here is so completely different, and its double blow of cruelty is almost re-emphasized, and you also avoid the literalness of that emotion. Yes. So you got back to Bishu, you got back to the villagers, but it is very important to notice that the most important part of Tagore's story, written story, is the scene that, and it's the most memorable part of Tagore's story, is the little scene that happens on the night before he leaves, is when they have just finished dinner, and Ratan says that, Babu, will you take me with you? আমাকে নিয়ে যাবে তোমার সঙ্গে? And he just smiles and says, তা কি করে হয়? And he laughs. And Ratan remembers that throughout the night. Now that is almost the climactic point of Tagore's story, the most emotional moment. Like he just laughs it off, and he just laughs and says that I can't even explain. He doesn't even bother explaining to her that why is it impossible for him to take her. Now Ray deliberately leaves that moment, takes out that moment, the most emotional moment of Tagore's story, and that is something that strikes us as strange as to why he will give up the most emotionally strong point of a literary piece that he's adapting. And we get to know about it later as to why he's doing that, because his objective from the story is completely different. So we get back to the last scene where it becomes evident to us as to why Satyajit Ray is avoiding that fantastic piece of exchanging Tagore's story. So this is functional. He is handing over the keys. Okay. So this Juktakhar remains Ashomapto all the time, because that's the theme. This incompleteness is exactly what he's aiming at. Unlike Tagore. Now he's such a, this is exactly like what we have been building up. I mean, this is almost squeamishness that he has, almost this spineless character, so very different from the one who shouted in the beginning of the scene just 35 minutes back, asking her to clean the room. Is even now afraid to face her and give her this bakshish. So he's initially like almost to the point that please give her the bakshish, which could have been the cruelest thing that he could have done. But he's gone to that point, and then he stops and says, oh, I'll give it to her.
Ratan.
So now you start getting a hint as to why Satyajit Ray has avoided that scene, is because he's attempting to achieve a very different end. The end that Tagore has narrative-wise, the story-wise, is that he offers her the bakshish himself, and Ratan falls at his feet and howls and cries and says, I don't need your money, and you don't need to think of me. I'll take care of myself. You go. I don't need to go anywhere. I'll take care of myself. So that's the narrative end of Tagore's story. Of course, there are two separate passages after that, where Tagore actually spends ruminating on these two characters and their fate. But Satyajit Ray is probably attempting something completely different. So this is where he is now take a dramatically different turn and moved away. Now, what I want you to notice here in the story, even in the end, he's kind of referring to the beginning of the film. Look how this guy's attitude towards his fellow villagers has changed so much now that he's so relieved about his departure. It's a very different interaction that he has, because he was talking to her in a different way. Just a few scenes back, he was talking to them in a very different way. Now you come to the final narrative exchange. You clearly know that Ratan is now the protagonist of the story and not the postmaster, as in Tagore's story. She has to wipe her tears. This is exactly where he departs, and he says, in Rabindranath, she's howling and crying, and in Satyajit's end, she is wiping her tears. She will not show what she is going through, and she actually clearly draws the line and sets her life apart from him in an almost act of defiance. It's so very exactly opposite, dramatically opposite from the beginning that the story starts with, and goes almost a 360-degree, where he just says that her space cannot be invaded by this guy anymore. Look at her face, it's a different Ratan now, completely. She's not even looking up, and she knows he's standing on the other side of the lane, and she's very aware that the tears should not show. And look how she passes him by. And not without a chance, probably Vishu is there. Vishu Pagla is there. She just stops and looks at him for a second, and she now gives him the final blow. Not in the screen, but off screen, where he now becomes, this is the only agency she has. She can become somebody else's servant. She just refuses to serve him anymore and transfers her allegiance, at least as an act of defiance. That's the only dignity she can restore for herself. And as I said, Vishu Pagla couldn't have been there by chance, but it's an extremely complex image as to why he's there, and you can interpret it the way you like. I mean, it's a beautiful image because it is subject to multiple interpretations. The end as to why Vishu Pagla is there. I mean, he definitely didn't do it by mistake. So yeah, and Tagore's story ends with this rumination with on first of all on the postmaster's side as to how nobody is for anybody, and life is such a cosmic thing, and that life is all about coming and going, and this is what saves the postmaster from his pang of guilt, and how Ratan stays in that house waiting that postmaster might just come back, and how this whole Ashar Cholone Bhuli is the core of tragedy. So this is where it ends, and how Satyajit Ray's end is completely different from that. So yeah, broadly that is what, and I don't know whether it made any sense or anything. If anybody has anything to ask or can discuss, we can do that. Hello, yeah. Am I audible?
Hello, Obada.
Yeah.
Yes. So
please take over.
Thank you, sir. It was really interesting, very informative and insightful presentation. I would like to now request the participants to come up with their queries, if any.
Obada, I think there is one query in the chat box. Sir, there is one query in the chat box. Indodil sir, could you please throw some light on Charulata of Satyajit Ray?
This is another webinar, honestly. I mean,
yes, exactly.
It's very difficult to talk about it casually, because it's another fantastic example of how, and in fact, this is one thing that you can do yourself very a service by reading something. This is one thing Ray has written in detail about in Vishwaya Cholochitro, responding to a criticism. He writes several letters which are collated together in Vishwaya Cholochitro, as to history, as to there was a lot of criticism about him adapting Charulata and making it so different from the story, which is exactly what you saw, that Postmaster is so different from the written story. And Ray goes about defending himself, and the reasons why he does that deviates from the story for the sake of telling the story that he wants to say is something that is again a fantastic exercise. He has done it himself in the case of Charulata, so I don't think you need anybody else to do that.
So, anyone else? I think we do not have any more questions. Okay, so Shubhankar Mondal is asking.
The last পোর্শনটা কেন চেঞ্জ করেছে, তাই তো? কেন করেছে?
রাইট,
তাই তো? মানে এটাই হ্যাঁ, এটা তো মানে অ্যাডাপ্টেশনে দুটো ঘটনা ঘটে। একটা হচ্ছে যে সাহিত্যটাকে ছবিতে আনার একটা প্রক্রিয়া আছে, তার সমস্যা এবং সুবিধা আছে। আর একটা হচ্ছে যে একটা শিল্পী একটা গল্পকে নিয়ে তার নিজের মানে কমপ্লিটলি অরিজিনাল একটা সৃষ্টি করছেন, এবং তার মানসিকতা, তার সময়, তার সৃষ্টিকে ডিটারমাইন করবে, এটাই তো স্বাভাবিক। রবীন্দ্রনাথ এই গল্পটা লিখছেন 1891 সালে। তিনি আশার ছলনে ভুলি এবং ভাগ্যের হাতে রতনকে ছেড়ে দিতে পারছেন হয়তো তার সময়ের কারণে। 1891 সালে হয়তো অন্য কোনো এন্ডিং সেই সময় তাকে দেখাচ্ছে না। সত্যজিৎ এই ছবিটা বানাচ্ছেন 1961 সালে, অর্থাৎ 70 বছর পরে। তিনি চাইছেন না রতন আশার ছলনে ভুলি বলে ওই দাওয়াটাতে একা একা বসে ঘুরে বেড়াক। স্বাভাবিক ন্যায্য কারণেই চাইছেন না। তিনি চাইছেন যে রতন তার মতো করে, তার পরিসরে, তার কি বলবো এখতিয়ারের ভেতরে থেকে যেটা সে বোঝাতে চায়, অর্থাৎ আমার জীবনের উপর তোমার কোনো অধিকার নেই, তুমি আমাকে কষ্ট দিতে পারো, কিন্তু আমি তোমার ওই টাকাটা নেব না, এবং তোমার মানে কি বলবো ওই সহানুভূতিটুকু আমি চাইবো না। এটা খুব এটা খুব সহজ উত্তর হচ্ছে যে 70 বছর পেরিয়ে গেছে, আর আরেকটা লোক একটা ছবি নিয়ে তার ভার্সন অফ দ্য স্টোরি বানাচ্ছে, এবং সেটা খুব ন্যায্য একটা যাত্রা।
Thank you, sir. But it is quite seen in Satyajit Ray's other adaptations also. He sometimes does deviate from the original story. For example, in Oranye Dinratri, Sunil Gangobadye was not at all happy to see such representation, because he was exactly pointing one point that all the travelers, they were traveling by train without tickets, but in the film they were doing this picnic with by hiring a car. So he was talking about, he was not at all satisfied, but we can all sometimes see that Satyajit Ray deviates from the original storyline. So what might be the reason?
But same reason, that you are making something original. You're not visually representing a story. That is not your job. You're making a film of your own, which is independent, which is a completely something that stands on its feet. It's a debate that we have all settled long back, that the identity of a written story and the identity of a piece of film is completely independent of each other and should not have and need not have any relationship to each other. Oranye Dinratri is a particular case in point, because in Postmaster, Satyajit is at least he's faithful to the emotions of Rabindranath's story, if not the ending, if not the resolution, but the emotions that are evoked in Tagore's story is something that Satyajit is faithful to. He evokes that in a completely different way. There's no doubt about it. Even in Oranye Dinratri, he just takes Sunil Gangobadye's story for a setup. It's a completely different piece of work that he's attempting. In fact, very interestingly, it's a film that is very unlike Satyajit Ray. Which is why I think it's a film that has been very under discussed vis-a-vis Satyajit Ray. I personally think it is one of his best works, one of his most interesting work, which has not been noticed that much in that sense. It's one work where he has deviated from his dramatic analytic structure very drastically. Like when I explained this whole build-up, you'll see that it's all a cause effect thing that he's working upon. You know, he's hidden that up. I mean, through his skill, through his extreme finesse, through his sense of humor, he has hidden the cause effect progression. But if you analyze and open up the film, you can clearly see the cause effect flowing through this. Oromne Din Ratri is one film where he deliberately moves away from that. You know, Gupigain Badhapain is another example of that, but of course that is a completely different format of storytelling. He's taken a fairy tale and he's taken a folk tale and made a musical out of that, which is a different genre altogether. But Oromne Din Ratri is one Ray film that is so under-examined because it's the most, what should I say, un-Satyajit film, and which makes it so interesting actually. There is virtually nothing in common between the characters in his film and Sunil Gangobadhyay. He's just, you know, casually, he just takes up the setting. That's all. That's all he takes. I think he just takes that line of 4 people going to the forest. Beyond that, and some vague elements, I think he has nothing to do with the story. Honestly speaking, Oromne Din Ratri as a piece of literature is quite a misfortune. So, you know, it's like you can clearly see that it's something that was written in 7 days and without much understanding the sequence. So it's a very botched up novel per se. But so he just took the setting and went about in a different direction.
Over kindly take over.
Yes. So we have some more questions, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
Can we just, okay. So Shubhankar Mondal is asking about the color impact on Kanchenjunga.
I'm not the right person to talk about this. I'll tell you honestly, we have not seen Kanchenjunga the way it needs to be seen. I mean, just now the print that I shared with you is such a bad print of Postmaster. But particularly of Kanchenjunga, which is his first color film, what remains right now and what we have seen is so sad and unfortunate. Basing any real serious discussion on that would be, you know, I don't know, it's a little troublesome. And then again, it's a different ballgame altogether. I mean, you'll have to start and see and go through the film as a whole thing.
And Achinto Ghosh is asking what relationship is showing in between Ratan and Nando Babu. Can we address it particularly?
Well, we went through that, right? I mean, that's exactly what we did. I mean, we went from one stage where it starts off with the fact that he just gets angry because he's fallen off the chair, and that's when Ratan looks at him.
Yes,
and
sir.
he starts behaving like a master.
You did go with utter details. I think I think we should look at the other questions also.
So
we are running out of.
Yeah. So as we are running out of time, I think I would like to now request.
Sir, there is one more question. I would request you to shed light on it. Sir, thank you for this wonderful session. I have seen your movies, sir. Fording is very close to my heart. Okay, that is not a question, I think. That is not a proper question, I think.
Shoroj is asking for some recommendations on the kind of films that students should watch to start understanding the very parameters used for creating films or things like that.
I will not advise, because I think it's a bad thing to do as to what you should see and what you should see and not see. But there is one tendency that I see a lot these days, which I would like to warn you against. That's all. I mean, I'm not giving you any advice. Ki ye dekho, wo mat dekho, don't see that. Don't see that. All I am saying is that because of, whenever I look at people who are in college or are aspiring filmmakers or anybody who's less than 25, 26, just getting into understanding cinema and stuff like that, there is a lot that goes around as world cinema at this point of time, right? The names that you hear, the masters that are there for the last 5-6 years, you hear their name in the festival circuit, they get written about in the newspapers. So when you think of world cinema, you kind of jump onto them, and that becomes a reference point. I personally feel that it's great. Of course, it's absolutely natural that you will watch what is being made around your time, but just basing your film viewing on contemporary filmmaking only is a very dangerous story, because you get swayed by what is in, and a lot of what is in is very temporary and very frivolous. So I would, I think the usual place to start and a very, very trustworthy place to start is old Hollywood. It's the safest place to start. You will never go wrong with Hollywood of the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s. You will never go wrong with that. I mean, it can be a limited way of looking at cinema, that I completely admit, but you will learn your ABCDs well, and learning your ABCDs well is always a good thing. So I'm not advising, but I'm saying, I mean, don't ignore Billy Wilder, don't ignore John Ford, don't ignore people like that, because for reasons, I mean, pretty obvious. Yeah.
Okay, so so thank you once again, sir, for joining us today, and I would like to now request our Anuradha ma'am to take over hands. Ma'am, over to you.
Madam, are you there?
I think ma'am has left the session.
No, I'm there. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I would thank Shri for having delivered such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
So minutely detailed. And I think the students and all the listeners have a rethought on the language of the translation of the language of film, the language of literature, the language of film. Thank you. Abha has thanked you already, and I'm once again thanking Mr. Rajudri for your for sparing your valuable time. I would like to thank a few other persons who will please kindly be with us. First of all, I would pay my thanks to the principal of Malda College, Dr. Manush Kumar Boito, for having us allowed to arrange such a wonderful webinar. I would thank respected Premendra Mojumdar, Vice President, FFSI, who has always helped in all possible ways to spread the link, to arrange the webinar, and a special thanks to Rita Doctor for all the connections. I'm thankful to Mr. Amrit Ganga for his wonderful speech. I pay my thanks to Rita once again for her lecture. It was a bit short time, but it was very precious. And Mr. Rajudri, once again, I especially like your lecture for having incorporated the particular scene where Ratan is envying Postmaster's sister, whom she has never seen. But the certain undercurrent of jealousy so well screened that she tries to sing a song. The Postmaster's sister can sing, and she too proves that she can sing a song. And whenever I see the grimmest of all the three of this trilogy, Tinkonna, the grimmest of all, a kind of exploitation, a kind of exploitation that Ratan goes through, that leaves a deep impact on your. I think your lecture should reach our students to learn the language of the film. I express my thanks to Jyotirmoy. Though there's no formality, he has taken all the pains to contact everybody to mail, and there was a rigorous. I can find the mailing process, I would thank Obhay, thank Aratrika, thank all the faculty members, and I would also like to thank Deeppratit, who has taken, and he always takes the responsibility of the
Madam,
technical
also
part.
Somnatha.
Of,
Madam,
yes,
also Somnatha is also there. Somnatha is monitoring this
Prabhashda is
program.
also there. He is there. Prabhashda is also there. He's our mentor of the Film Society, and all the students. I think we have started from 2 p.m. and it's 6 now. So you've shared your time. Thank you, everybody. Jyotirmoy, let's make a formal end of it.
Thank you, sir, for kindly consenting us to be with us on this webinar. Thank you very much. Thank you for your wonderful lecture, wonderful presentation. We would be looking forward to hearing from you in future as well, if you kindly consent once again. I would also I would also like to thank Somnath for monitoring all this entire program, for streaming this entire program on YouTube also. So
Somnath did the YouTube part.
yes, yes. And once again, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all the participants for taking keen interest in this webinar and participating this webinar. Thank you very much. The session ends here. Thank you very much once again, Indoreen sir. Thank you, sir.